My daughter stood in the center of the marble foyer I had laid with my own hands 30 years ago and told me I was trespassing. She held the arm of her husband Blake, a man who has never calloused his hands a day in his life, and said, "Dad, this villa belongs to Blake's family now. You are not allowed to come here anymore." I looked at the deed in her hand and then at the smirk on my son-in-law's face. They thought they had won. They thought a 69-year-old black man from the South Side would just roll over and die because they had a piece of paper. I simply smiled and nodded. What they did not know was that when they moved in, I had already prepared a surprise for them that would cost them everything. Before I continue this story of betrayal and justice, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by the very people you sacrificed everything for. My name is Reginald Carter, but everyone calls me Reggie. For 40 years, I ran the most respected construction firm in this county. I built half the luxury estates in this suburb back when folks like me were not even welcome to buy them. I retired with dignity, a healthy bank account, and a villa that was supposed to be the legacy for my family. But legacies are funny things. They can be gifts, or they can be curses depending on whose hands they fall into. It was a Sunday evening and the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that settles into your bones when you have lived alone for 3 years since your wife passed. I was sitting at the mahogany dining table eating a simple pot roast and reading the newspaper. I cherish my Sundays. They are the only days I allow myself to truly rest. The silence was shattered not by a knock but by the sound of the front door flying open. There was no greeting, no hello, Dad. No taking off shoes at the door out of respect for the hardwood floors I polish every week. Tiana, my only daughter, walked in with her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Trailing behind her was Blake Evans, her husband. Blake had that look on his face that he always gets when he thinks he is the smartest person in the room. It is a mix of arrogance and pity that makes my blood boil, but I kept my face neutral. I put down my fork and wiped my mouth with a napkin. I asked them if they were hungry and if they wanted a plate. Blake laughed. It was a dry, short sound. He tossed a thick manila folder onto the table right next to my water glass. The folder slid across the polished wood and stopped inches from my hand. "We are not here for dinner," Reggie Blake said. "He never calls me Mr. Carter. He never calls me Dad, just Reggie, as if we are equals, as if he has earned the right to stand on my level." Tiana refused to look me in the eye. She was staring at the portrait of her mother hanging above the fireplace. She looked nervous, twisting the diamond ring I helped pay for on her finger. "Dad, we need to talk," Tiana said, her voice trembling slightly. "Blake and I have come to a decision. It is about the house." I looked at the folder and then back at them. I asked, "What about the house?" Blake stepped forward, taking charge. He placed his hands on my dining table, leaning in as if to intimidate me. "It is time for you to move out, Reggie. By next weekend." I did not blink. I took a sip of water. "Move out," I repeated slowly. "To where exactly?" Tiana finally looked at me. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. "Dad, please do not make this difficult. Blake's parents, Preston and Victoria, they lost their home. There was a terrible fire last night. Everything is gone. They have nowhere to go." "A fire." I looked at Blake. He nodded solemnly, but his eyes were shifting around the room, appraising the crystal chandelier and the crown molding. "Yes, a tragedy," Blake said. "Total loss. They are devastated. And since this house is way too big for one old man living alone, it is only right that you vacate so they can have a roof over their heads. This is a family emergency, Reggie. We have to prioritize the people who actually have a future." I leaned back in my chair. The leather creaked in the silence. I knew Preston and Victoria Evans. They were people who spent money they did not have to impress people they did not like. They had always looked down on me and my wife Beatrice. They called our style ethnic. They made jokes about affirmative action when my company won bids over their friends. And now my daughter wanted me to leave the home I built so those people could sleep in my bed. I asked Tiana if she was serious. I asked her if she was really telling her father to leave his own home for people who have never shown us a shred of respect. Blake slammed his hand on the table. "It is not your home, Reggie," he snapped. "Do not forget who holds the deed. Tiana has owned this property for 5 years. You are just a guest here, a guest who has overstayed his welcome." He was right about one thing. 5 years ago, when Beatrice got sick, I transferred the title of the house to Tiana. It was a strategy to avoid inheritance taxes and probate court. It was supposed to be a safety measure, a way to protect her. I never imagined the document meant to secure her future would be used as a weapon against my present. Tiana spoke up. her voice gaining strength from her husband's aggression. "Dad, it is legal. The house is mine. And honestly, Blake is right. You do not need 5 bedrooms. You do not use the pool. The garden is overgrown. The garden was not overgrown. I tended to Beatrice's roses every single morning." That was a lie. Just like the fire sounded like a lie. I could smell the deception rolling off them like cheap cologne. "So where am I supposed to go?" I asked calmly. Blake pulled a brochure from his jacket pocket and tossed it on top of the folder. "There is a motel on the edge of town, the Starlight. We paid for a month. It is close to the bus stop, so you will not have to worry about driving that truck of yours anymore. It is safer for everyone, really. At your age, you should not be behind the wheel anyway. The Starlight Motel, a place known for drug deals and hourly rates. They wanted to move me from a $3 million villa to a roach motel, and they wanted me to be grateful for it." I looked at my daughter, the little girl I carried on my shoulders, the girl whose tuition I paid for cash, the woman whose wedding cost me 6 figures. I looked for a trace of my Beatrice in her, but all I saw was a weak woman desperate to please a man who did not deserve her. I stood up slowly. Stood up. I am 6'2", and even at 69, I am not a small man. Blake took a half step back instinctively. I looked around the room. I looked at the floors I sanded, the walls I painted, the life I built. "Fine," I said. They both froze. They were expecting a fight. They were expecting me to yell and scream and beg. They were ready for a war, but they were not ready for surrender. "Fine," I repeated. "If you want the house, you can have it. If Preston and Victoria need a place to stay, I will not be the one to stop them. I will pack my things. I will be out by Friday." Tiana let out a breath she had been holding. "Oh, Dad, thank you. I knew you would understand. It is just temporary, you know. Just until they get back on their feet." Blake smirked. "Yeah, thanks, Reggie. Leave the keys on the counter when you go. And do not take anything that is attached to the walls. Those fixtures are expensive." They turned to leave, anxious to get out of the tension, anxious to go celebrate their victory. They did not see the cold look in my eyes. They did not see me pick up my phone the second the door closed. I sat back down at my table. The pot roast was cold now. I ate it anyway. As I chewed, I thought about the folder on the table. I thought about the deed Tiana held. And then I thought about the other document, the one they knew nothing about, the one sitting in a safe deposit box across town. See, I spent 40 years in construction and real estate. I know how to read a contract, and more importantly, I know how to write one. When I gave Tiana the house, I gave her the structure, the bricks, the wood, the glass, but I did not give her the land. I own the ground this house sits on through a separate LLC. And that ground lease has a very specific clause, a clause that says if the primary resident is anyone other than Reginald Carter, the rent for the land adjusts from $1 a year to current market commercial rates. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had not called in a long time. "Marcus," I said when he answered. "It is Uncle Reggie. I need you to clear your schedule. We have work to do." They wanted me out. They wanted my villa. They wanted to throw me away like yesterday's trash. I smiled to myself in the empty dining room. I hope they enjoy the house, because the rent is coming due, and it is going to be a lot more than they can afford. It was supposed to be a grace period. Tiana had told me I had until the weekend to pack 30 years of life into cardboard boxes. But greed does not own a calendar, and it certainly does not respect a man's time. It was barely Tuesday afternoon when the invasion began. I was in the living room carefully wrapping Beatrice's collection of porcelain angels. It was raining outside, a gray, heavy downpour that battered the windows of the villa I had built brick by brick. The sound of the rain usually soothed me, but today it just felt like the sky was weeping for what was about to happen. I heard the front door unlock, not a knock, not a ring, just the click of a key that Tiana had given them without my permission. The door swung open and the storm blew in. But it wasn't just wind and rain entering my home. It was Preston and Victoria Evans, Blake's parents. The people who claimed they had lost everything in a fire, yet here they were, dry and arrogant, stepping into my foyer like they were royalty visiting the peasants. Victoria led the charge. She is a woman who wears her insecurity like a fur coat, loud and expensive. She was wearing stilettos, sharp-pointed heels that looked like weapons. I watched in silence as she stepped directly onto the silk Persian rug Beatrice and I had bought in Morocco 20 years ago. It was a delicate thing, hand-woven, a masterpiece of deep reds and golds. Beatrice used to make everyone take their shoes off before even looking at it. Victoria ground her muddy heels right into the center of the silk, leaving jagged streaks of wet dirt across the pattern. She stopped and wrinkled her nose, sniffing the air theatrically. "Oh, God, Tiana," she said, her voice grating like a rusty hinge. "It smells in here." Tiana stepped in behind her, looking small and terrified. "What do you mean, Victoria?" "It smells like old people," Victoria declared, waving her hand in front of her face. "And something else, something musky, spicy. It is too heavy, too ethnic. We need to get the cleaners in here immediately to scrub this place down. We need to sanitize it before we can even think about moving in." I stood there holding a porcelain angel, feeling my grip tighten until I was afraid I would crush it. That smell she was spitting on was the lingering scent of Beatrice's spices. It was the smell of sage and thyme and the special blend she used for her Sunday roasts. It was the smell of warmth, of family, of a home that had seen love. To Victoria, it was just a stench to be bleached away. She began walking around the living room, pointing at things with a manicured finger. The Afrocentric art pieces we had collected from local artists, the warm terracotta walls, the heavy oak furniture I had carved myself. "All of this has to go," she announced. "It is so dark, so gloomy. It feels like a museum for things that nobody wants anymore. We need to paint everything white, or maybe a nice soft beige, something classy, something civilized." Civilized. The word hung in the air. I knew exactly what she meant. She meant white. She meant devoid of me, devoid of my history. I looked at Tiana, waiting. I waited for her to say that her mother loved these colors. I waited for her to say that her father built this furniture with his own 2 hands. I waited for her to have a spine. Instead, Tiana nodded, eager to please. "You are right, Victoria, it is very dated. Mom never really had an eye for modern design. It is too cluttered. We will strip it all. We will make it open and airy, just how you like it." Her words hit me harder than any physical blow. She wasn't just giving away my house. She was agreeing to erase her own mother's legacy just to fit into this woman's beige little world. Then Preston made his move. He is a man who has failed upward his entire life, failing businesses and living off credit while looking down on men like me who actually work. He walked past me without even a nod. He didn't see a person. He saw a servant who hadn't cleared out fast enough. He went straight for the built-in mahogany bar in the corner of the lounge. I stiffened. On the top shelf sat a bottle of 50-year-old single malt scotch. It was a gift from a commercial developer I had saved from bankruptcy back in the 90s. It was worth $5,000. I had never opened it. I was saving it for Tiana's first child, or maybe my 70th birthday. Preston grabbed the bottle by the neck. He didn't look at the label. He didn't appreciate the dust or the seal. He just cracked it open, tearing the foil with his teeth. He grabbed a crystal tumbler and poured it to the rim like it was cheap mouthwash. He took a swig and smacked his lips. "Hey, Reggie," he called out, not bothering to turn around. "Not bad. I did not know you people had a taste for the good stuff. Usually it is just malt liquor, right?" The microaggression was so casual, so practiced, it almost didn't register. "You people. Malt liquor." Blake, who had just walked in, laughed. "Yeah, well, Reggie was a gardener or something before he got lucky with this place, right, Reggie? I was never a gardener. I owned the company that built the foundations this house stood on. But to them I would always be the help." I took a breath deep and slow, letting the rage settle into a cold, hard stone in my stomach. I did not say a word. I did not stop him from drinking the scotch. Let him drink it. It would be the most expensive drink he ever had. He just didn't know the price yet. Preston turned to me, glass in hand, his face flushed. "Look, Reggie, we are going to need the master suite tonight. The movers are coming early tomorrow, and Victoria needs her rest. The noise of the rain is too loud in the guest rooms." The master suite, my bedroom. The bed where I held Beatrice's hand as she took her last breath. Tiana stepped forward, avoiding my gaze. "Dad, it is just easier this way. You can sleep in the back room tonight. The one off the laundry room. The storage room." It was a windowless box where we kept the winter coats and the extra tools. It had a small folding cot I used when I was painting the house so I wouldn't track paint into the bedroom. They were kicking me out of my bed and putting me in the closet, in my own house. I looked at them. Victoria wiping her muddy shoes on my sofa. Preston chugging my vintage scotch. Blake smirking at his wife, and Tiana looking at the floor ashamed but unwilling to stop it. Of course, I said, my voice steady and calm. I would not want to be in the way. The storage room is fine. I picked up my box of angels. I walked out of the living room, my head bowed, my shoulders slumped, playing the part of the broken, defeated old man perfectly. But as I walked down the hallway toward the laundry room, I slid my hand into my pocket. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recorder app. I pressed the red button. I captured every laugh, every insult they threw at my back, every plan they discussed about tearing down the walls I built. I entered the small, cramped storage room and closed the door. The air smelled of dust and old paint. I didn't unpack the cot. I didn't lie down. Instead, I knelt in the corner behind a stack of old paint cans. There was a section of the baseboard that looked seamless, but if you knew where to push it, clicked open. I removed the panel. Behind it, hidden in the wall, was a small fireproof safe. I spun the dial. Left, right, left, click. The door swung open. Inside sat a single thick black leather folder. I pulled it out. My hands didn't tremble. They were steady, strong, the hands of a man who built skyscrapers. This folder contained the deed to the land, the original ground lease agreement I had drawn up 20 years ago, the documents for the LLC that actually owned the property, and most importantly, the amendment that triggered the commercial rent clause if I was ever removed from the premises. I held the folder to my chest. Upstairs, I could hear them. I heard Victoria complaining about the towels. I heard Preston laughing as he poured another glass of my scotch. I heard Blake talking about digging up the rose garden to put in a hot tub. They thought they had won. They thought they had taken a king's castle. They didn't know they were just rats scurrying into a trap. I sat on the cold floor of the storage room, clutching my black folder, and I smiled in the dark. Sleep well in my bed tonight, Preston. Enjoy the silk sheets, Victoria, because tomorrow morning I am going to introduce you to the landlord, and he is not as forgiving as the gardener. I told Tiana I was going for a walk to clear my head. She did not even look up from her phone. She was too busy discussing paint swatches with Victoria, debating between eggshell and cream for the walls of my living room. I walked out the back door past the rose bushes that were already marked with orange spray paint for removal and got into my old Ford F-150. I drove 3 miles down the road to a place where nobody cared about thread counts or vintage scotch. Earl's Diner has been on the corner of Main and 5th since before I started my company. The vinyl seats are cracked and the air always smells like bacon grease and old coffee, but it is honest. I walked in and saw Marcus sitting in the back booth. He stood out like a sore thumb in his $3,000 Italian suit, typing furiously on a laptop. Marcus Thorne is the best real estate attorney in the state. He is also the son of my late best friend. I paid for his law school when his father passed. He calls me Uncle Reggie, and he is the only man I trust with my life. When I sat down, Marcus slammed his laptop shut. His eyes were burning with a fury I rarely saw. Uncle Reggie, tell me you did not actually sleep in the storage room last night. Tell me that was a joke. I waved the waitress over and ordered a black coffee and a slice of pecan pie. It was not a joke, Marcus, I said. I slept on a cot next to a bucket of primer while Preston Evans drank my 50-year-old scotch and slept in the bed I shared with Beatrice. Marcus clenched his jaw so hard I thought a tooth might crack. I will have them evicted by noon, he growled. I will have the sheriff there in 20 minutes. We do not have to play games with these people. I reached across the table and put a hand on his arm. Calm down, son. A builder does not start swinging a sledgehammer until he has checked the blueprints. I need to know what we are dealing with. What did you find on the Evans family? Marcus took a deep breath and pulled a thick stack of documents from his briefcase. He slid them across the sticky table. You are going to want to eat that pie first, he said. It is ugly, Reggie. It is really ugly. I opened the file. The first thing I saw was a series of photos. They were pictures of a large suburban house in a gated community about 40 miles north of here. The house belonging to Preston and Victoria Evans. Or rather, the house that used to belong to them. There was no fire, Marcus said, pointing to a date on a document. There was never a fire. The fire department has no record of a call. The insurance company has no record of a claim. I looked at the paper. It was a foreclosure notice stamped in red ink. Notice of default. Eviction order. They did not lose their house to a tragedy, Marcus explained. They lost it to greed. Preston has been refinancing that house every 2 years to pay for Victoria's shopping habits and his failed investment schemes. They were underwater 3 years ago. The bank finally had enough. They were physically evicted by the sheriff last Tuesday. They are destitute, Reggie. They have less than $500 in their checking account. I turned the page. I saw credit card statements, pages and pages of them. Neiman Marcus, Nordstrom, Ritz-Carlton. They were living the life of millionaires on a credit limit that ran out 5 years ago. So they are broke, I said, taking a bite of pie. That explains why they needed a place to stay. But it does not explain why Tiana and Blake are so desperate to get me out. Tiana has a good job. Blake works in finance. They should be able to support them without kicking me to the curb. Marcus shook his head. Keep reading. It gets worse. I flipped to the section labeled Blake Evans. I saw screenshots of a crypto trading platform. Red numbers. So many red numbers. Blake does not work in finance, Marcus said. He works in sales for a leasing company, but he tells everyone he is a day trader. He leveraged everything they had. He borrowed against his 401k. He maxed out Tiana's credit cards. And he put it all into some obscure cryptocurrency that crashed 2 months ago. I looked at the total loss. $200,000. My son-in-law had gambled away a fortune while looking down his nose at me for driving a 10-year-old truck. He is drowning, Marcus said. He owes money to the banks. He owes money to the IRS. And rumor has it he owes money to some private lenders who do not use the court system to collect. I closed the file. The picture was clear now. The arrogance, the rush to move in, the desperation disguised as superiority. They were not just cruel. They were cornered rats. But there is one piece missing, I said. Why my house? Tiana already owns the structure. Why do they need me physically gone? Why can't they just move in with me? The house is 6,000 square feet. Marcus pulled out one final document. It was a loan application. A home equity line of credit application for $2.5 million against the value of my villa. Here is the kicker, Marcus said, tapping the paper. They are trying to pull out every cent of equity in the property. They want to pay off Blake's gambling debts. They want to pay off Preston's judgments. And they want to fund a lifestyle they can't afford. But there is a problem. I leaned in. What is the problem? The bank flagged the title, Marcus said with a grin. When you transferred the deed to Tiana 5 years ago, we included a life estate clause. It grants you the exclusive right to reside in the property until your death. As long as that clause is active, the bank considers the property encumbered. They cannot foreclose on you, so they will not lend against it. I sat back. The pieces fell into place. That was why Blake had handed me that paper to sign. That was why they needed me out. They need me to sign a quitclaim on my residency rights, I realized. They need me to voluntarily abandon the property so they can strip the equity and leave Tiana with nothing but debt. Exactly, Marcus said. If you sign that paper, Reggie, you are giving them the keys to the vault. They will drain the value of that house in a week. Do not sign it. We can stop this right now. I can file an injunction. I looked out the window of the diner. I watched the traffic go by. I thought about Tiana, my daughter, my beau. She stood there and let her husband humiliate me. She let his parents treat her mother's legacy like trash. She chose them. She chose the illusion of wealth over the reality of family. If I stop them now, they will just find another way, I said softly. They will never learn. They will just blame me for their failure. They will say I held them back. I looked at Marcus. Let them have it. Marcus blinked. Excuse me. Let them have the loan, I said, my voice hardening. I am going to sign the paper. I am going to give up my residency rights. Uncle Reggie. Are you crazy? Marcus whispered. That is $2.5 million. They will blow it all. I know, I said. But remember the other contract, the ground lease. Marcus's eyes went wide. The one that connects the land to the house. I own the land, I said. The house sits on my dirt. The ground lease says that if the resident is anyone other than me, the rent adjusts to commercial market rates. And it says that the landowner has a priority lien on all structures on the property. I smiled. A cold, hard smile. Let the bank give them the money. Let Blake pay off his bookies. Let Victoria buy her furs. Let them feel rich for a few months. Because when I enforce that ground lease, I become the primary creditor. And since the bank's loan is second to the ground lease lien, I will have the legal right to foreclose on the structure to collect my rent. I will not just be taking back the house, Marcus. I will be taking everything they buy with that loan. I will own their cars, their clothes, their bank accounts. Marcus sat back in the booth, a look of pure admiration on his face. You are going to let them dig the hole, and then you are going to bury them in it. I finished my coffee. They want to play big shots. They want to pretend they own the world. I am going to give them exactly what they want, and then I am going to show them what happens when the bill comes due. Go back to the office, Marcus. Draft the papers. Make sure the ground lease trigger is airtight. I am going home to sign my rights away. I left a $20 bill on the table for a $3 pie. I walked out to my truck feeling lighter than I had in days. They thought I was a senile old man they could push around. They forgot that before you build a house, you have to survey the land. And this was my land, every inch of it. The smell of greasy pepperoni pizza filled the dining room of the villa I had built with my own sweat and blood. It was my last night in my home, yet there was no farewell dinner, no roast chicken, no gathering of family to honor the memories we had made within these walls. Instead, there were cardboard boxes of takeout on my mahogany table and plastic cups filled with cheap soda. Tiana and Blake sat at one end whispering and laughing, while Preston and Victoria Evans sat at the other picking at their slices with a look of distaste as if the food was beneath them even though they had not paid for a cent of it. I sat alone in the middle, a solitary island in a sea of ingratitude. I had spent the afternoon perfecting my role. I wore my oldest cardigan, the one with the frayed cuffs and the missing button. I shuffled when I walked, dragging my feet just enough to sound tired. I let my shoulders slump, rounding my back to shave 2 inches off my height. I took off my reading glasses and left them in my room, squinting at everything as if the world had become a blur. I was no longer Reginald Carter, the construction magnate who could calculate the load-bearing capacity of a steel beam in his head. I was just Reggie, the old used-up man they wanted me to be. I cleared my throat, a dry, raspy sound that made Tiana jump. I pushed my paper plate away, the pizza untouched. I told them that I had made the arrangements. I told them I would be leaving in the morning. I said I had called the Starlight Motel and they had a room available on the ground floor. I kept my voice low and trembling, infusing it with a pathetic resignation that made my own stomach turn. Blake did not even look up from his phone. He just grunted a sound of dismissal that signaled he had won. Tiana bit her lip, looking at me with those big, watery eyes that used to melt my heart when she was 6 years old. She reached out and touched my hand, her fingers cold and clammy. She said she was sorry it had to be this way, but that it was for the best. She said the motel would be easier for me to manage, less cleaning, less worry. She sounded like she was trying to convince herself more than me. Then Victoria spoke up. She wiped a speck of tomato sauce from her lip with a napkin, her movements precise and predatory. She smiled, but it was not a smile of warmth. It was the smile of a wolf looking at a wounded deer. She said she thought it was a wonderful idea. She said the Starlight Motel was a very sensible choice for someone in my position. "It is right on the edge of town, isn't it?" Victoria asked, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "That is so convenient for you, Reggie. It is right next to the bus depot. You won't have to worry about maintaining a vehicle anymore. You can just hop on the bus with the rest of the locals. It is much more fitting for your lifestyle, don't you think?" The insult was wrapped in politeness, but the blade was sharp. She was telling me I belonged on the bus. She was telling me I belonged on the fringes of society, away from the manicured lawns and gated driveways of her world. She was reminding me that no matter how much money I had made, no matter how big this house was to her, I would always be lesser. I would always be the man who should be taking the bus, not driving a $60,000 truck. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the desperation behind her eyes, the fear of a woman who was broke and homeless projecting her own failures onto me. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell her that I could buy the bus depot and turn it into a parking lot for my collection of vintage cars if I wanted to. But I didn't. I swallowed my pride. I nodded slowly, acting as if her words were sage advice instead of a slap in the face. "You are right, Victoria," I said, my voice cracking perfectly. "Driving has been getting hard lately. My eyes are not what they used to be. The bus will be safer. It is good to be around simple folks." Preston chuckled, pouring himself another glass of my wine. "Yeah, simple folks," he echoed. "You will be right at home, Reggie. Maybe you can find a little gardening work around the motel to keep busy. Keep your hands dirty, right?" Tiana flinched at that. "Dad worked hard for this family," she mumbled, but she didn't raise her voice. She didn't defend me. She just let the insult hang there, validating their disrespect with her silence. Blake finally put down his phone. He reached under the table and pulled out a crisp, legal-sized document. He slid it across the table toward me, pushing aside the pizza boxes. "Since you are leaving tomorrow, we need to get the paperwork out of the way tonight." Blake said, his tone businesslike and cold. "This is just a standard quitclaim form. It officially removes your residency rights so we can update the insurance and the utility bills. It is just a formality, Reggie, just so we do not get any mail for you here anymore." I looked at the paper. It was not about mail. It was a waiver of my life estate. It was the key to the vault. If I signed this, I was legally declaring that I no longer lived here, stripping away the one protection that stopped the bank from lending them millions of dollars against the house. I squinted at the text, leaning in close, playing up my bad eyesight. I asked if I needed a lawyer to look at it. I asked if this meant I could never come back to visit. Blake sighed, an exaggerated sound of impatience. "No, Reggie, you do not need a lawyer. It is a standard form. And of course you can visit. You just cannot live here. We need this signed tonight so I can file it in the morning. Do you want to hold up Tiana's happiness over some paperwork?" He uncapped a pen and thrust it into my hand. The pen felt heavy. This was the moment. This was the point of no return. I took the pen. I let my hand hover over the signature line. I started to shake. I made my hand tremble violently, the pen tip tapping against the paper, leaving little dots of ink. "I am sorry," I muttered. My hands. "They get so shaky at night. Just sign it, Dad," Tiana whispered, unable to look at me. "Just sign it so we can all move on." I pressed the pen to the paper. But I did not sign Reginald Carter as I had signed every contract, every check, and every deed for 40 years. My official signature is a sharp, angular script with a distinctive loop on the R and a sharp slash through the T. It is the signature the bank has on file. It is the signature that authorizes millions of dollars. Instead, I let the pen slide and jerk. I wrote R. Carter, but I made the letters round and soft. I skipped the loop. I barely crossed the T. It looked like the writing of a man who was losing his faculties. It looked like the writing of a man under duress. And legally, it was a disaster. Marcus had told me that a signature that did not match the bank specimen would be flagged immediately if they tried to use it for anything other than the specific waiver. But more importantly, by signing it this way, I was leaving a breadcrumb, a proof that I was playing a role. If this ever went to court, I could claim I was confused, coerced, or simply that it wasn't my standard mark. But for their purposes, it was enough. It was ink on paper. I finished the scrawl and sat back, dropping the pen as if it exhausted me. "There," I said softly. "It is done. The house is yours." Blake snatched the paper away before the ink was even dry. He looked at it satisfied. He didn't notice the difference. He didn't care. He just saw dollar signs. "Perfect," he said, a grin spreading across his face. "You did the right thing, Reggie. You finally did something useful for this family." He stood up, clutching the paper like a winning lottery ticket. "All right, everyone, I think we should celebrate." Tiana opened another bottle of wine. "Reggie, you should probably get some sleep. You have a big day of moving tomorrow." I stood up slowly, using the table for support. I looked at my daughter one last time. She was pouring wine for the people who treated me like dirt. She was laughing at something Victoria said. She had already moved on. "Good night," I said. Nobody answered. I walked to the storage room, my footsteps heavy on the floor. I closed the door and locked it. I sat on the cot in the darkness and listened to them toast to their new fortune. They were celebrating the theft of my home. They were celebrating their cleverness. But they had just accepted a Trojan horse. They had the paper, but I held the detonator. And tomorrow, when I walked out that door, the countdown would begin. Friday morning arrived with a violence that matched the storm in my heart. The sky was a bruised charcoal gray, and the rain fell in sheets, hammering against the roof of the villa like 1,000 angry fists. It was fitting weather for an exile. I stood in the foyer with my 2 battered suitcases, the sum total of what I was taking from 40 years of life in this house. I had left the furniture. I had left the art. I had left the crystal. I only took my clothes, my personal documents, and the photo albums of Beatrice that I refused to let Victoria get her manicured claws on. The silence of the house was broken by a mechanical roar that shook the floorboards beneath my feet. It was a deep grinding sound, the sound of heavy machinery tearing into the earth. I walked to the French doors that led to the backyard and looked out through the rain-streaked glass. My breath hitched in my throat, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. A massive yellow excavator was sitting in the middle of the garden. Its steel tracks were churning up the manicured lawn, turning the green grass into a soup of brown mud. But that was not what broke me. The metal arm of the machine swung around its claw opening like the maw of a predator and smashed down into the center of the rose garden. These were not just any flowers. These were heirloom roses, Queen Elizabeth's, Mr. Lincoln's. Beatrice had planted them with her own hands 20 years ago. She had tended to them every morning, pruning them, talking to them, treating them like her children. When she got sick, she would sit by the window and watch me water them. She made me promise to keep them alive. They were the last living piece of her spirit in this place. I watched in horror as the excavator ripped them from the earth. The roots snapped with a sound I could hear even through the glass. The red and pink petals, heavy with rain, were trampled into the muck. They were clearing the ground for a swimming pool, a heated, saltwater infinity pool for Victoria to lounge by while she drank my wine. They were paving over my wife's memory to build a monument to their own vanity. I placed my hand on the cold glass. I wanted to run out there. I wanted to stand in front of that machine and scream. But I knew it would change nothing. The roses were already gone. Beatrice was gone. And soon I would be gone too. I turned away from the window. The image of the crushed petals burned into my retina. I picked up my suitcases. They felt heavy, weighted down by the gravity of the betrayal. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The air was cold and damp. Tiana was standing in the driveway under a large black umbrella. She was wearing a trench coat that cost more than my first car. She was shouting instructions to the foreman over the roar of the engine. She was pointing at the destruction, making widening gestures with her hands. She wanted it bigger. She wanted it deeper. She did not look at the house. She did not look for me. She was so consumed by her vision of a luxury lifestyle that she did not even notice her father standing 10 feet away, leaving her life forever. Preston was there too. He was standing on the sheltered part of the porch, smoking a cigar that I recognized from my humidor. He was leaning against the railing, watching the rain with a bored expression. As I dragged my suitcases past him, the wheels clicking on the slate tiles, he looked down. Next to the door sat my old gardening boots. They were made of thick leather, stained with soil and oil, creased from years of squatting in the dirt. I had forgotten to pack them. They were the boots I wore when I built this porch. They were the boots I wore when I planted the oak tree in the front yard. They were the symbol of the work that had paid for the roof over his head. Preston looked at the boots and then at me. He sneered. He reached out with his foot and kicked them. They tumbled down the wet steps and landed in a puddle of mud at the bottom. "Hey you," Preston shouted at one of the workers. "When you are done with the dirt, come get this trash. We need to clean up the entrance. It looks like a junkyard up here." Trash. He called my work boots trash. He called the tools of my trade garbage. I looked at him. I saw a man who had never built a thing in his life, a man who destroyed everything he touched, judging the very foundation of my existence. I walked down the steps. I picked up my boots from the mud. The water was cold and seeped into the leather, but I didn't care. I wiped them off on my pant leg. I would not leave them for him. I would not let him throw away my dignity along with my home. Tiana finally turned around. She saw me standing there in the rain, holding my muddy boots and my suitcases. For a second, just a fraction of a second, I saw a flash of guilt in her eyes. She took a step toward me, then stopped. She looked at the house. She looked at the excavator. She looked at Preston watching us from the porch. She made her choice. "Leaving already?" she asked, her voice fighting to be heard over the rain. "Yes," I said. "I am leaving." She nodded, her face hardening again. "Well, it is for the best, Dad. You will see. You will be more comfortable at the motel. Less to worry about. No stairs, no yard work. It is a good thing." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who used to sit on my lap while I read her bedtime stories. I looked at the woman who cried when she scraped her knee and came running to me for a Band-Aid. That woman was gone. The person standing in front of me was a stranger who valued a swimming pool over her father's heart. "Tiana." I said, my voice low but cutting through the noise of the storm. "I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember the rain. I want you to remember the roses. You chose this. You chose them over me." She flinched. "Don't be dramatic, Dad," she snapped, shifting her umbrella nervously. "We are family. We are just rearranging things. You can come visit once we are settled, once the pool is done." I did not answer. There was nothing left to say. I walked to my truck, my 2015 Ford F-150. It was a work truck, solid and reliable, just like me. I threw my suitcases in the back seat. I placed my boots on the floorboard. I climbed into the driver's seat and shut the door. The sound of the rain became a dull thrum. The smell of old leather and coffee filled the cab. It was the only place in the world that still felt like mine. I started the engine. It roared to life, a deep, powerful sound. I put it in gear and pulled out of the driveway. I did not look back. I did not look in the rearview mirror to see the house shrinking in the distance. Lot's wife looked back and turned to a pillar of salt. I intended to remain a man of flesh and blood, a man of action. I drove down the winding streets of the gated community. I passed the security guard who waved at me. He thought I was just going to the hardware store. He didn't know I was being exiled. I reached the main road. To the left was the highway that led to the edge of town, to the industrial district, to the bus depot, and to the Starlight Motel, to the squalor they had assigned to me, to the end of the line. To the right was the city, the skyline rising against the gray clouds, the steel and glass towers where business was done, where power lived. I turned on my blinker. I turned right. I drove for 40 minutes, the rain lashing against the windshield. I listened to jazz on the radio, letting the saxophone calm the pounding in my chest. I drove into the heart of the financial district. I pulled up to the entrance of the Sovereign, the only five-star hotel in the city. It was a massive structure of limestone and gold, a palace of luxury. I pulled my muddy truck right up to the front entrance, parking it between a Bentley and a Ferrari. The valet rushed out with an umbrella. He was a young man named David. He saw the truck. He saw the old man behind the wheel. Most people would have tried to wave me away. They would have told me deliveries were in the back. But David knew better. He opened my door and shielded me from the rain. "Mr. Carter," he said with a bright smile. "Welcome back, sir. It has been a while." I stepped out. I handed him the keys. "Keep it close, David," I said, pressing a $100 bill into his hand. "I might need it later." "Of course, Mr. Carter. Whatever you need." I walked into the lobby. The air smelled of white tea and expensive lilies. The marble floors gleamed. The general manager, a woman named Ms. Sterling, saw me from across the room. She stopped what she was doing and walked over immediately, her heels clicking on the stone. "Mr. Carter," she said, extending her hand. "We were not expecting you, but it is always a pleasure. Will you be needing the penthouse suite?" I shook her hand. "Yes, Ms. Sterling, and I will be needing it for an extended stay, ideally until I evict some squatters from my property." She did not ask questions. She did not blink. "Consider it done, sir. We will have your favorite wine sent up immediately." I took the key card. I walked to the private elevator. As the doors closed, shutting out the world, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. I didn't look like a victim. I didn't look like a sad old man living in a motel. I looked like a general retreating to his command bunker. They thought they had sent me to the gutter. They thought I was crying in a room that smelled of stale cigarettes. They had no idea. I was about to pour a glass of Pinot Noir, look out over the city I helped build, and wait for the first check to bounce. The war had started, and I had just secured the high ground. The glass of Pinot Noir in my hand caught the light of the city skyline, creating a deep ruby reflection that danced on the wall of the penthouse suite. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the streets of Atlanta 50 floors below. From this height, the cars looked like toys and the people were invisible. It was quiet up here. The kind of expensive quiet that you can only buy with serious money. The air conditioning hummed a soft white noise, and the sheets on the king-size bed behind me were Egyptian cotton, not the polyester blend you find at the Starlight Motel. I took a sip of the wine, letting the complex notes of cherry and earth settle on my tongue. It was a vintage bottle worth more than Blake's car. My family thought I was currently sitting on a stained mattress, listening to the sounds of highway traffic and weeping into a pillow. They imagined me broken. They imagined me destitute. They had no idea that I was standing in the center of my own command post, preparing to launch a nuclear strike on their financial future. The elevator dinged softly, and the doors slid open. Marcus walked in carrying his leather briefcase and a look of intense focus. He stopped for a second, admiring the view and the sheer opulence of the suite. He let out a low whistle. "Uncle Reggie, you certainly know how to be homeless in style," Marcus said, walking over to the wet bar to pour himself a sparkling water. I turned away from the window. "I am not homeless, Marcus. I am just between residences, and I intend to make this interim period very profitable. Did you bring the documents?" Marcus set his briefcase on the marble coffee table and snapped the latches open. He pulled out the black leather folder I had retrieved from the wall safe. He laid it down next to a map of the property and a calculator. "I have reviewed everything 3 times, Reggie," Marcus said, his voice turning serious. It is ironclad. It is actually brilliant. I knew you were smart, but I did not realize you were this diabolical. I sat down opposite him. I am not diabolical, son. I am a businessman. And in construction, you always protect your foundation. Walk me through it. I want to make sure there are no cracks. Marcus opened the folder and pointed to a thick document titled Ground Lease Agreement dated 20 years ago. Okay, here is the breakdown. Marcus began tapping the paper with his pen. When you transferred the house to Tiana 5 years ago, you executed a deed of transfer for the improvements only. That means legally Tiana owns the structure. She owns the bricks, the wood, the roof, and the pool they are digging. I nodded. Correct. She owns the house. But Marcus continued a smile creeping onto his face. She does not own the land. The legal description of the property she owns stops at the foundation line. The earth beneath it, the driveway, the gardens, the entire 3 acres of prime suburban real estate belongs to Carter Holdings, LLC, a company solely owned by Reginald Carter. I took another sip of wine. And what does the lease say about rent? Marcus flipped to page 12. This is the kill switch. Clause 4, Section B, regarding residency and rental rates. The lease states that the ground rent is set at a nominal fee of $1 per year provided that the primary resident of the property is Reginald Carter. He looked up at me, his eyes gleaming. As long as you lived there, the rent was free, but the moment you cease to be the primary resident, the subsidized rate expires. And here is the kicker. The lease automatically adjusts to the current commercial market rate for land use in this zip code. And what is the current market rate for 3 acres in this neighborhood? I asked, knowing the answer but wanting to hear him say it. Marcus punched a few numbers into the calculator. Based on comparable commercial land leases in this area, you are looking at roughly $60,000 a month. $60,000 a month. I swirled the wine in my glass. That is a lot of money for a sales guy and a part-time consultant. It gets better, Marcus said, flipping another page. The lease has a retroactive clause for unauthorized occupancy. If the tenant fails to notify the landowner of the change in residency within 24 hours, penalties accrue at 300% of the base rent. I leaned back. So because I moved out this morning and they did not notify Carter Holdings LLC by tomorrow, the rent triples. Exactly, Marcus said. And since they have no idea this lease even exists, they are going to be racking up debt at a rate of $180,000 a month starting tomorrow. But that is not the weapon I need right now, Marcus. Rent is just a bill. People ignore bills all the time, especially people like Blake who are used to dodging creditors. I need leverage. I need the power to take it all back. Marcus turned to the final page of the document. He pointed to a paragraph highlighted in yellow. Here it is. The priority lien clause. This states that the landowner has a first position lien on all improvements and structures on the land to secure the payment of rent. This lien supersedes all other debts, mortgages, or encumbrances. Translate that for me, I said, setting my glass down. It means you are first in line, Marcus said. Before the bank, before the credit card companies, before the IRS. If they do not pay the ground rent, you have the legal right to foreclose on the house itself. You can seize the structure to pay the debt for the land. Since the debt will likely exceed the equity in the house within a year, you will effectively own the house again. You can evict them and take the keys back legally. I looked at the documents. It was a trap I had set years ago, not because I wanted to hurt my daughter, but because I knew the world was dangerous. I knew men like Blake existed. I built a safety valve into my legacy, and they had just hammered on it with a sledgehammer. So we served them with the notice tomorrow, Marcus asked, reaching for his phone. We hit them with the bill. We stop the construction of the pool. We end this charade right now. I looked at my watch. It was 8 o'clock. Across town, Tiana and Blake were probably drinking champagne, celebrating their victory. They were probably looking at samples for the new kitchen. They were feeling rich. No, I said softly. Marcus froze. What do you mean, no? Not yet, I said. If we serve them the notice tomorrow, we stop the bleeding. We save the house, but we do not teach the lesson. I stood up and walked back to the window. The rain had stopped, but the city was still wet and slick. If we sue them now, the bank will see the litigation, I explained. They will see the cloud on the title. They will cancel the home equity loan. Tiana and Blake will not get the $2.5 million. Marcus looked confused. Isn't that a good thing? We do not want them to have the money. I turned around and smiled. A cold, hard smile that I used to wear when I was negotiating with steel unions. Yes, we do, Marcus. We want them to have every single penny. I walked back to the table and tapped the file. Think about it. Blake owes $200,000 to people who break kneecaps. Preston and Victoria are penniless. Tiana is drowning in credit card debt. If I stop them now, they are just broke. They will play the victim. They will say, I ruined their big break. I want them to get the loan. I want the bank to deposit $2.5 million into their account. I want Blake to pay off his debts so he feels safe. I want Victoria to go shopping and buy furs and diamonds. I want them to book first-class tickets to Europe. I want them to spend that money until they feel like kings and queens. But Uncle Reggie Marcus argued, that is equity they are stripping from the house. That is your value they are spending. It is paper value, I countered. The house is just wood and stone. I can always renovate it again. But the lesson that is priceless. See Marcus the priority. Lean means I come before the bank. So when I finally drop the hammer, when I present them with the bill for the ground rent, the bank is going to panic. The bank will realize their loan is second to my lease. They will realize their collateral is worthless because I am seizing it. What will the bank do then, I asked. Marcus's eyes widened as he realized the end game. The bank will call the loan. They will trigger the acceleration clause. They will demand the full $2.5 million back immediately due to the undisclosed encumbrance on the title. Exactly, I said. And by then the money will be spent. Blake will have paid his bookies. Victoria will have bought her jewelry. They won't have the cash to pay the bank back, so the bank will freeze everything they own, Marcus finished. Their personal accounts, their wages, their cars. The bank will go nuclear to recover their loss. And I will be standing there holding the deed to the land I said. I will evict them for non-payment of rent. The bank will destroy their credit and their lives to get the money back. And Tiana will finally see that her husband and his family are nothing but parasites who drained her dry. I picked up my wine glass. Let them have the loan, Marcus. Let them dig the hole so deep they can never climb out. We wait. We watch. We let them buy the rope. And when they are standing on the chair with the noose around their necks, that is when we kick it away. Marcus closed the folder. He looked at me with a mix of fear and awe. You are a dangerous man, Reginald Carter. I am a father, I said, looking at the city lights. And sometimes being a father means letting your children burn their hands so they learn not to touch the stove. I raised my glass. To the loan. May it be approved quickly. Marcus raised his sparkling water. To the loan. We sat in the luxury of the penthouse waiting for the bank to finance my family's destruction. The war had moved from the battlefield to the boardroom, and I had just rigged the game. The days turned into weeks, and I watched from my high-altitude fortress as my former life was dismantled piece by piece. I had installed hidden cameras in the common areas of the villa years ago for security while I traveled. Now they served as a window into the soul of the people who had betrayed me. I sat in the darkened penthouse suite, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating my face, and witnessed the carnival of greed unfold in high definition. The Evans family wasted no time. The ink was barely dry on my fraudulent eviction notice before the parties began. Every night was a celebration of their new status. I watched as Victoria Evans strutted through my living room wearing my late wife's pearls. Beatrice had worn those pearls on our 30th anniversary. They were simple, elegant, a symbol of our enduring love. Victoria wore them like cheap costume jewelry, draping them over her flashy silk blouses as she poured glass after glass of my premium wine for her loud, obnoxious friends. Look at this place, I heard her crow to a woman with too much hairspray. Can you believe the old man kept all this locked away? It was like living in a tomb. We are breathing life back into it. Breathing life. She meant suffocating it with excess. The dining table where Beatrice and I had shared quiet breakfasts and serious conversations about our future was now constantly covered in half-eaten catering trays and empty champagne bottles. Preston held court at the head of the table, my seat telling stories of his business conquests that I knew were fabrications. He smoked his cigars inside the house, tapping the ash onto the hardwood floors I had installed myself. It is good to finally have a place that matches our caliber, Preston would say, raising a glass of my cognac. We deserve this, after everything we have been through. They acted like refugees who had survived a war, not con artists who had stolen a home. Tiana was always in the background of these scenes. She looked exhausted. She was no longer the confident woman who had kicked me out. She was running around playing hostess, refilling drinks, cleaning up spills, trying desperately to please the people who had invaded her life. One evening I watched as Victoria snapped her fingers at my daughter. "Tiana, get me more ice, and make sure it is crushed this time. You know I hate cubes." Tiana froze. For a second I thought she would fight back. I thought she would remember that she was the owner of the house, that she was a grown woman with a career, but then she just nodded. "Okay, Victoria, right away." She hurried to the kitchen like a servant. My heart ached for her, but my resolve hardened. She had chosen this. She had traded a father who treated her like a princess for a mother-in-law who treated her like a maid. Then came the spending. The loan had not even been finalized yet, but Blake was already spending the money he assumed was coming. I saw him pull into the driveway in a brand new car. It was not just a car. It was a bright red Italian sports car, low to the ground and loud as thunder. He revved the engine in the driveway, waking up the neighbors, announcing his arrival like a conquering hero. I watched the feed from the driveway camera as he stepped out wearing sunglasses even though it was dusk. He patted the hood of the car affectionately. "Baby," he said to Tiana, who had come out to see the noise. "Look at this beauty. The dealership let me take it on a lease-to-own deal. Once the loan clears, I am paying it off in cash." Tiana looked at the car and then at him. "Blake, we haven't even been approved yet. Is this safe?" "Relax, babe," Blake scoffed. "The loan is a done deal. Your dad is gone. The title is clear. We are sitting on a gold mine. Why shouldn't we enjoy it? Besides, I need a car that projects success. You want me to close deals driving a Honda?" He wrapped his arm around her, but his eyes were on the car. He loved the metal and glass more than he loved the woman standing next to him. He saw her as the key to the ignition, nothing more. But the worst was yet to come. The renovations began in earnest. They didn't just want to change the paint or the furniture. They wanted to erase the history of the house. They wanted to scrub away the soul of the place. I watched on a Saturday afternoon as a crew of workers carried buckets of paint into the library. The library was Beatrice's sanctuary. It was a room lined with oak bookshelves filled with first editions and family photo albums. It was where she went to pray, to read, to find peace. We called it her prayer room. It still smelled of her lavender perfume. Blake walked in with a contractor. He pointed around the room with a dismissive wave. "Clear all these shelves," he ordered. "We are going to turn this into a game room. I want a poker table in the center, big screen TV on that wall, a full wet bar over there." The contractor nodded. "What about the books, sir?" "Trash them," Blake said. "Or donate them. I don't care, just get them out. And paint these walls something dark, like a charcoal gray. Man cave vibes, you know." I sat in my hotel room and gripped the edge of the desk until my knuckles turned white. They were turning my wife's prayer room into a gambling den. They were taking a space dedicated to spirit and reflection and turning it into a shrine to vice and greed. It was a desecration. It was a deliberate act of violence against my memory and hers. Tiana walked into the room on the screen. She looked at the books being tossed into boxes. She picked up a small leather-bound Bible that had belonged to her grandmother. "Blake," she said softly, "this was Mom's room. She loved this room." Blake turned on her, his face twisting into a sneer. "Your mom is dead, Tiana, and your dad is gone. This is our house now. My parents need a place to relax. I need a place to entertain. We are not living in a mausoleum. Get with the program or get out of the way." Tiana stood there clutching the Bible to her chest. She looked small, defeated. She didn't say a word. She turned and walked out, leaving him to destroy the last sanctuary in the house. I closed the laptop. The image of Blake standing in the center of Beatrice's room planning his poker nights burned in my mind. I felt a cold fury rising in my chest, a tide of anger that threatened to drown me. But I pushed it down. I channeled it. "Enough," I whispered to the empty penthouse. They had crossed the final line. They had insulted my wife's memory. They had treated my daughter like a slave. They had spent money they didn't have on toys they didn't need. They were celebrating their victory, but they didn't realize the game was still being played. They were feasting on the corpse of my life, but the poison was already in the meat. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus. "Is the paperwork for the ground lease ready?" I asked without preamble. "It is ready, Uncle Reggie," Marcus replied instantly. "Just say the word." "Not yet," I said. "Let them finish the poker room. Let them buy the felt table and the chips. Let them get comfortable." "But Marcus," I added, my voice dropping an octave. "Call the bank manager, the one we play golf with. Tell him I said hello, and tell him that when the application for the Carter property comes across his desk, he should approve it. Immediately." Marcus paused. You want to speed it up? Yes, I said. They are hungry, Marcus. Let's feed them. Let's give them exactly what they want so they can choke on it. I hung up the phone. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Blake was probably sitting in his new car dreaming of being a big shot. Tiana was probably crying in the bathroom. And Victoria was probably spilling wine on my rugs. Enjoy it while it lasts, I thought, because the landlord is watching, and eviction day is coming. The morning Tiana and Blake walked into the First National Bank of Atlanta, they looked like they owned the place. Blake was wearing a suit that was too shiny, and Tiana was clutching a designer bag she had bought on credit the day before. They marched up to the loan officer's desk with the confidence of people who had never actually earned $1 million but felt entitled to spend it. I knew exactly when they arrived because my phone rang at 9:15. It was Arthur Henderson, the branch manager. Arthur and I go back 30 years. I built his first house, and he financed my first major commercial project. We have played poker every third Thursday for a decade. He knows my finances better than I do, and he certainly knows that I do not sign over my residency rights without a fight. Reggie, Arthur said, his voice low and professional. I have your daughter and her husband in my office. They have a quitclaim deed here signed by you. It waives your life estate on the property. They are applying for a $2.5 million home equity line of credit. I stood by the window of my penthouse suite looking down at the city. I could picture them sitting there. Blake probably had his legs crossed, tapping his foot, impatient to get his hands on the cash. Tiana was likely staring at the floor, trying not to think about what she had done to get there. Is the signature valid? Arthur, I asked, knowing full well it was the shaky scrawl I had produced under duress. It looks a bit off, Reggie, Arthur admitted. A bit shaky. If I wanted to, I could flag this for review. I could hold it up for weeks pending a notary verification. I could tell them I need to speak to you in person. Just say the word and I will shut this down right now. I swirled the ice in my glass of water. It was tempting. It would be so easy to save them from themselves, to stop the loan, to force them to face their debts honestly. But honesty was a language they did not speak. They needed a lesson in consequences, not a bailout. No, Arthur. I said, my voice calm and cold. Do not stop it. Process the application. Arthur paused. There was silence on the line. Reggie, are you sure? This is a lot of equity. They are maxing out the value of the property. If they default, you know what happens. I know exactly what happens, I said. But Arthur, I need you to do me a favor, a professional courtesy. Name it Reggie. I want you to add a specific rider to the loan agreement I instructed. A default acceleration clause. I want it to state clearly that if any legal encumbrances, liens, or disputes regarding the title or land usage arise, the loan is immediately called due in full. No grace period, no negotiation, immediate repayment. Arthur let out a low whistle. That is a poison pill, Reggie. If anyone puts a lien on that house, the bank will freeze their assets and seize everything to cover the debt instantly. Why would you want that? Because I am the one who is going to put the lien on it, I thought. But out loud, I just said, call it an insurance policy, Arthur. Just do it, and make sure they sign it. They probably won't even read it. You are the boss, Reggie, Arthur said. I will draw it up. I hope you know what you are doing. I hung up the phone. I knew exactly what I was doing. I was handing a loaded gun to a man who liked to play with triggers. An hour later, I got a text from Arthur. It was just a thumbs-up emoji. It was done. The papers were signed. The trap was set. The money hit their account 48 hours later. $2.5 million. It is a number that changes people. For a man like me, it represents years of sweat and concrete. For Blake Evans, it was a winning lottery ticket he hadn't bought. I watched the celebration from my laptop screen. They didn't even wait to get home. They went straight to a high-end steakhouse for lunch. I saw the charges hit Tiana's credit card, which I still monitored. $500 for Wagyu beef, $300 for champagne. They were toasting to their brilliance. They were laughing at the old man who had walked away and left the vault door open. That evening, Blake disappeared for a few hours. I knew where he went. He went to meet a man named Vinny in the back room of a pool hall on the south side. I had my private investigator tail him just to be sure. Blake handed over a duffel bag with $200,000 in cash. He paid off his gambling debts. I watched the footage later. Blake walked out of that pool hall with a swagger I had never seen before. He felt invincible. He had cleared his ledger. He had erased his mistakes with my money. He thought he was free. He didn't realize he had just traded a loan shark for a shark in a suit, and the shark in the suit was his father-in-law. When he got back to the villa, the real spending began. They sat in the living room, surrounded by travel brochures and laptops. "We deserve a break," Victoria announced, pouring herself a glass of wine. All this stress with the move and the fire. "We need to get away." "Paris." Tiana suggested, her eyes lighting up. "We have always wanted to go to Paris." "Paris is nice," Blake agreed, leaning back on my sofa, his feet on my coffee table. "But why stop there? Let's do a tour. First class, 5-star hotels. Paris, Rome, Monaco. Let's show everyone how the Evans family lives." They booked the tickets right there. $30,000 for flights, another $50,000 for hotels. They were burning through cash like it was paper. They booked a suite at the Ritz. They reserved tables at Michelin-star restaurants. They were planning a victory lap across Europe paid for by the equity of the home I built. I watched Tiana's face on the screen. She was smiling. She looked happy, relieved even. She thought the nightmare was over. She thought the money had fixed everything. She didn't see the shadow hanging over her. Blake stood up and raised his glass. To us, he shouted. To the new owners of the Carter estate. And to Reggie for finally knowing when to quit. They clinked glasses. They laughed. They drank. I sat in my penthouse 50 floors above them and raised my own glass. To the Claws, I whispered. They had the money. They had the tickets. They had the arrogance. But they had signed the paper. They had agreed to the terms. And they had no idea that the ground beneath their feet was about to open up and swallow them whole. Go to Paris, I thought. Eat the snails. Drink the wine. Take the pictures. Because when you come back, the locks will be changed and the landlord will be waiting to collect the rent. And I promise you the price of admission will be higher than you can ever pay. The glow of the laptop screen was the only light in the penthouse suite as I sat there at 4 a.m. wrestling with my conscience. I had spent the last 48 hours watching the surveillance feed, witnessing the methodical dismantling of my life. I had seen them rip out the roses. I had seen them pawn the silver. I had heard them mock my name. By every law of the jungle, I should have just let the trap snap shut without a word. I should have let Marcus file the papers and watch them burn in the fire they had lit. But Tiana was still my daughter. She was still the little girl who used to sit on my knee and ask me to draw houses for her dolls. Even though she had grown into a woman who stood by while her husband humiliated me, a small, foolish part of my heart wanted to offer her one last off-ramp, one final chance to wake up before the car went over the cliff. I opened a secure anonymous email account. I didn't use my name. I used the corporate identity of the LLC that held the deed. I typed the subject line with the precision of a surgeon: urgent legal notice regarding property title and ground lease obligations. I kept the message cold, professional, and terrifyingly specific. To the current occupants of 12 Oakwood Lane, please be advised that the ground lease agreement governing the land upon which the residential structure sits contains a strict residency clause. As the primary resident, Reginald Carter, has vacated the premises, the subsidized ground rent rate of $1 per annum is set to expire immediately. Effective upon the date of vacancy, the rental rate for the land will adjust to current commercial market rates for the district. Failure to execute a new lease agreement within 7 days will result in retroactive penalties calculated at 300% of the base rate. Furthermore, under the priority lien provisions of the standing agreement, the landowner reserves the right to initiate foreclosure proceedings on all improvements and structures to satisfy any outstanding debt. It is strongly recommended that you consult legal counsel immediately to avoid default. I hovered my finger over the enter key. I wasn't signing it, Dad. I signed it Asset Management Division Carter Holdings LLC. It was a warning shot fired directly across their bow. If Tiana had retained even a fraction of the business sense I tried to teach her, she would freeze. She would call a lawyer. She would check the county records. She would realize that owning a house does not mean owning the earth beneath it. If she called me, if she asked for help, if she showed just a flicker of realization or humility, I might have paused the execution. I might have worked out a payment plan. God help you, Tiana, I whispered to the empty room. I clicked send. I immediately switched tabs to the live feed from the kitchen. It was morning at the villa. The sun was streaming through the windows onto the granite island where Tiana sat drinking a green smoothie. Blake was next to her, tearing into a plate of eggs Benedict prepared by the private chef they had hired for the week. His iPad was propped up against the fruit bowl, pinging with notifications. He tapped the screen with a greasy finger, chewing loudly. He frowned, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Babe, what is this?" he muttered, squinting at the screen. "Some spam from Asset Management Division." Tiana looked up, uninterested. "What does it say?" Blake read it out loud. He stumbled over the legal terminology, his voice flat and bored. He mispronounced retroactive and skipped over priority lien entirely. When he finished, there was a brief, heavy silence in the kitchen. Tiana put down her smoothie. Her face had lost some of its color. "Blake," she said, her voice tight. "That sounds specific. Ground lease commercial rates. What if Dad didn't give us the land? What if he kept it in a company name?" Blake stared at the screen for another second, processing. Then he threw his head back and let out a bark of laughter that echoed off the high ceilings. "Are you kidding me?" he scoffed, waving a piece of bacon in the air like a conductor's baton. "Tiana, use your brain. This is a prank, or a scam, or maybe your dad is just trying to spook us from his roach motel." He leaned forward, his face twisting into a sneer of superiority. "Think about it. You have the deed. We signed the papers at the bank. The bank did a title search. Do you think First National would hand us $2.5 million if we didn't own the dirt? Banks don't make mistakes like that. They would have flagged it." "But the email mentions a clause," Tiana argued, though I could see her conviction wavering under his confidence. "It says the rent goes up because Dad moved out. That matches the timeline." "It is a bluff," Blake insisted, swiping at the screen aggressively. "Look, old Reggie probably got one of his drinking buddies to send this just to ruin our trip to Paris. He is jealous. He is sitting in that dump miserable, and he wants us to be miserable too. Ground leases are for skyscrapers in Manhattan, not houses in the suburbs. The land always goes with the house. That is Real Estate 101. He tapped the screen 3 times. "Delete, block sender, empty trash." "There," he said, grinning. "Problem solved. Now, are we going to talk about this nonsense, or are we going to decide which Michelin restaurant to book for our first night in Rome?" I watched him delete the email. He hadn't just deleted a message. He had deleted their future. He had deleted the only life raft in the middle of the ocean. He was so arrogant, so sure of his own limited intelligence that he couldn't conceive of a world where he hadn't already won. He thought he knew Real Estate 101. He was about to fail the final exam. Tiana still looked uneasy. She was twisting her wedding ring, a nervous habit she had since she got married. "Blake, maybe we should just call a lawyer, just to be sure. It wouldn't hurt to check the title again." Victoria walked into the kitchen at that exact moment. She was wearing a silk robe that I recognized instantly. It was Beatrice's one she had bought on our trip to Italy. Seeing this woman wearing my dead wife's clothes made my stomach churn. She poured herself a mimosa from the pitcher on the counter. "Check what?" she asked. Her voice slurred slightly even this early in the morning. Tiana explained the email, her voice small and hesitant, shrinking under her mother-in-law's gaze. Victoria rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Tiana, don't be such a coward. You are always so jumpy. Blake is right. Your father is a bitter, manipulative old man. He is trying to control you from a distance. Do not let him." She walked over and placed a hand on Blake's shoulder, ignoring Tiana entirely. "My son knows business. He got you the loan, didn't he? He secured our future. If there was a real legal problem, Blake would know about it. Stop looking for clouds when the sun is finally shining on us." She turned to Blake, beaming. "Ignore her, darling. She gets her nerves from her mother's side, I assume. Just focus on the trip. We deserve to enjoy ourselves without this negativity." Tiana shrank into herself. She nodded, defeated, the fight draining out of her. "You are right. I am sorry. I guess I am just used to Dad handling the legal stuff. I get anxious." "Well, he is not handling it anymore," Blake said, clinking his glass against his mother's. "We are, and we are doing just fine." They went back to their breakfast. They went back to planning their vacation. They laughed about the weather in Paris. I sat in the penthouse and closed my eyes. I had done my duty. I had offered the olive branch. They had snapped it in half and thrown it in the fire. I picked up my phone and texted Marcus. They ignored the warning. Proceed with the filing. It was over. The last thread connecting me to them had been severed. They were no longer family. They were just tenants, and delinquent ones at that. I stood up and walked to the safe. I put the laptop away. I didn't need to watch anymore. I knew how this movie ended. They would go to Europe. They would spend the money. And when they came back, They wouldn't be coming home to a villa. They would be coming home to a foreclosure. The mercy period had officially expired. Now it was time for business. 3 months had passed since I watched my daughter and her husband board a plane to Paris with $2.5 million of borrowed money burning a hole in their pockets. 3 months of silence from the villa on the hill. I stayed in my penthouse suite, quietly running my empire and waiting for the inevitable crash. I knew the money would not last forever, especially not with the way Blake gambled and Victoria shopped. They returned 2 weeks ago with tans that looked expensive and luggage that cost more than most people make in a year. But the spending did not stop there. They were planning their grand entrance into high society. They called it the housewarming of the century. I heard about it through the grapevine first. My old business contacts, the contractors and caterers I had worked with for decades, called me confused. They told me that the Evans family was throwing a gala at my old address. They were hiring valet parking security guards and a 5-star catering team. They were inviting the mayor, the city council members, and every wealthy socialite in a 50-mile radius. They wanted to show the world that they had arrived. They wanted to prove that they belonged among the elite. They had no idea that they were building a stage for their own execution. I watched the preparations from a distance. Trucks arrived daily delivering ice sculptures, exotic flowers, and rented furniture because apparently my hand-carved oak tables were not good enough for their new image. They were transforming the home I built with love into a showroom for their vanity. It was grotesque. It was a desperate attempt to buy respect with credit. Then on the morning of the party, my phone rang. It was Tiana. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. I had not spoken to her since the day she watched me drive away in the rain. I wondered if she was calling to apologize. I wondered if she had realized her mistake. "Hello, Tiana," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Hi, Dad," she said. She sounded breathless, stressed. There was noise in the background, people shouting orders, dishes clattering. "Look, I am calling because, well, we are having a little get-together tonight. A housewarming party. A little get-together." I knew for a fact they had ordered 300 lobster tails. "That sounds nice," I said. "Yeah, well, Blake and his parents thought we should invite you," Tiana continued, rushing through the words. "It is the right thing to do since you lived here for so long, and people might ask where you are. We do not want them to think we are not a close family. Appearances. It was always about appearances. They did not want me there because they missed me. They wanted me there as a prop. A silent, smiling old man to prove they were benevolent caretakers of the elderly. I would be happy to come," I said. "Great," Tiana said, but her voice dropped lower. "But Dad, I need you to promise me something. This is a very high-class event. The mayor is coming. Blake's business partners are coming. Important people. Please, Dad, wear something nice, not your work clothes. Not that old cardigan. Wear a suit, a proper suit. And please try not to talk too much about the construction business or your old truck. Just mingle, smile, and enjoy the food. Do not embarrass me, Dad. Please, do not make me look bad in front of Victoria's friends. Do not embarrass her. I had built that house. I had paid for her education. I had saved her husband from prison by not reporting his fraud earlier. And she was worried I would embarrass her by being myself. The sting of her shame was sharp, but it was quickly replaced by a cold resolve. "I understand, Tiana," I said. "I will dress appropriately. I will be on my best behavior. I will not embarrass you." I hung up the phone. She had no idea what embarrassment was, but she was about to learn. Tonight she would learn the difference between the shame of poverty and the shame of theft. I went to my closet in the penthouse. It was filled with Italian wool suits, silk ties, and handmade shoes. I could have walked into that party looking like a senator. I could have outshined every man in that room. But that was not the message I wanted to send. I pushed aside the Armani and the Hugo Boss. I reached all the way to the back of the closet. I pulled out a suit I had bought 15 years ago. It was a simple gray polyester blend off the rack from a department store. It was clean, but it was dated. The lapels were too wide. The fabric had a slight shine to it from wear. It was the suit of a working man who needed something for church and funerals. It was the suit of the man they thought I was. I put it on. It fit a little loose around the shoulders now. I tied a simple blue tie. I looked in the mirror. I saw Reginald Carter, the man who started with a shovel and a dream. I did not see a victim. I saw a wolf in sheep's clothing. I took the elevator down to the garage. The valet moved to get my luxury sedan, but I shook my head. I walked past the Mercedes and the Lexus. I walked straight to my 2015 Ford F-150. It still had mud on the tires from the last job site I visited. It had a dent in the bumper from a lumberyard accident. It was a truck that told the truth. I climbed in and started the engine. The rumble of the diesel felt good beneath me. I checked the passenger seat. Sitting there was a single red envelope. It was thick, heavy. It contained the bill. The invoice for 5 years of back rent calculated at commercial rates plus penalties and interest. It was a bill for nearly $500,000. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. "I am en route," I said. "I am ready, Uncle Reggie," Marcus replied. "The papers are filed. The writ of execution is in my hand. The private process servers are standing by. We will be right behind you." "Good," I said. "Give me an hour. Let them get comfortable. Let them start the speeches. Let them think they are kings." "I understand," Marcus said. "Tonight is the night." "Tonight is judgment night," I corrected. I pulled out onto the street and turned toward the suburbs. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the city. I drove slowly, savoring the anticipation. I thought about the rose garden they had destroyed. I thought about the boots Preston had kicked. I thought about Tiana telling me not to embarrass her. They wanted a show. They wanted to parade their success in front of the world. Well, I was going to give them a show. I was going to give them a performance they would talk about for the rest of their lives. I was coming home. And this time I wasn't knocking. I was bringing the house down. The gravel crunched beneath the tires of my Ford F-150 as I turned into the long, winding driveway of the estate I had designed on a napkin 30 years ago. The house was ablaze with light. Every window glowed like a gold coin in the darkness. It looked beautiful. It looked majestic. It looked like a lie. I pulled up to the front entrance where a team of valets in white jackets were scrambling to park a parade of Bentleys and Maseratis. The air smelled of expensive perfume and wood smoke from the outdoor fire pits they had installed over my azaleas. When the lead valet saw my truck, he actually stepped back as if he were afraid the rust might be contagious. He looked at my dented bumper, and then at the line of supercars behind me, and I could see the panic in his eyes. He waved his hand frantically, gesturing for me to go around to the service entrance. I rolled down my window. I handed him my keys. I told him to park it right up front. I told him to put it next to the red Ferrari. He looked like he wanted to argue. He looked like he wanted to tell me that the staff lot was around the back. But there was something in my voice that stopped him, something cold and hard that cut through his confusion. He took the keys with 2 fingers as if they were dirty. I stepped out of the truck. I smoothed the lapels of my 15-year-old polyester suit. It was a little tight around the chest, and the fabric had that cheap sheen under the floodlights. I looked like exactly what they thought I was, a relic, a man who had been left behind by the march of progress. I walked up the stone steps. The front door was open and the sound of a string quartet drifted out into the night. I stepped across the threshold and the noise of the party hit me. Laughter, the clinking of crystal, the hum of conversation among people who had never worried about a mortgage payment in their lives. The foyer was crowded. I moved through the sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos like a ghost. No one looked me in the eye. They looked through me. They looked over my shoulder. I was an obstacle to be navigated around, not a person to be acknowledged. I saw the way they glanced at my suit. I saw the small curled lips of disdain. I heard the whispers trailing in my wake. Who is that? Is he lost? Maybe he is the help. Most of the guests were Blake's friends or people Victoria was trying to impress. They were overwhelmingly white, wealthy, and young. They stood in tight circles holding flutes of champagne, talking about mergers and acquisitions and summer homes in the Hamptons. I felt the invisible wall they built around themselves. A wall of privilege that I had spent my life trying to climb over, and now I was standing inside it, and I had never felt more like an outsider. I made my way to the main ballroom. They had removed all my furniture. The room was filled with rented white sofas and high-top tables draped in silk. In the center of the room stood Victoria Evans. She was holding a microphone in one hand and a glass of wine in the other. She looked radiant in a silver gown that hugged her body. She looked like the queen of the castle. She saw me enter. Her eyes lit up not with warmth but with a malicious delight. She tapped the microphone. The feedback whined and the room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. "Everyone listen up," she called out, her voice amplified and echoing off the high ceilings. "We have a very special guest who just arrived. She pointed a manicured finger directly at me. The crowd turned. 200 heads swiveled to look at the old black man in the cheap gray suit standing by the door. I felt the weight of their stare. It was heavy and suffocating. "I want you all to meet Reggie," she announced, her voice dripping with a condescension so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Reggie is practically part of the history of this house." She paused for effect. She smiled that shark smile. "Before we bought this place and turned it into a home, Reggie was the one who took care of the grounds. He was the gardener here for years. He knows every plant in the yard. He really has a green thumb. Let us give him a round of applause for keeping the grass so green before we took over." The gardener. She called me the gardener. She erased 40 years of my life. She erased the construction company I built from nothing. She erased the fact that I designed the very roof over her head. She reduced me to the help. She played into every stereotype, every prejudice, every assumption that the people in that room held about a man who looked like me. And then they laughed. It started as a ripple and grew into a wave, a polite, cruel laughter. They clapped their hands lightly. They nodded at me with benevolent smiles. "Oh, how nice." The old gardener came to see the new owners. "Isn't that sweet? Isn't that quaint?" I stood there frozen. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wanted to shout. I wanted to tell them I owned the dirt they were standing on. I wanted to tell them I had more money in my liquid accounts than most of them would see in a lifetime. But I didn't. I forced my lips into a smile. I nodded my head. I played the part. I let them laugh. Because the more they laughed now, the harder they would cry later. Blake walked up to me then. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand, and his arm was draped around the shoulders of a man in a suit that cost more than my truck. He looked at me, and then he looked out the front window where my Ford was parked right next to his Ferrari. "Hey," Reggie Blake said, loud enough for his circle of friends to hear. "I saw you park that monstrosity out front. Bold move. You trying to lower the property value, or did you just run out of gas?" His friends roared with laughter. One of them slapped Blake on the back. "Seriously," Reggie Blake continued, taking a sip of his drink. "You need to move it around back. It is dripping oil on the pavers. We just had those power washed. We can't have the service vehicles cluttering up the entrance. It confuses the guests. They might think we are doing renovations." He winked at his friends. They snickered. I looked at Blake, the man whose gambling debts I had paid, the man whose lifestyle I had subsidized. He was mocking the vehicle that carried the tools that built his life. He was spitting on the work that put clothes on his back. "I will move it later, Blake," I said, my voice quiet and submissive. I just wanted to say hello to Tiana. Speaking of Tiana, she appeared at my elbow. She grabbed my arm. Her grip was tight, painful. She did not hug me. She did not kiss my cheek. She pulled me away from the center of the room, dragging me toward a dark corner near the kitchen doors. She looked furious. Her face was flushed and her eyes were darting around the room, checking to see who was watching us. "Dad, what are you doing?" she hissed. I looked at her confused. "I am just saying hello. You invited me." "Tiana, I invited you to mingle," she snapped. "Not to stand there and let everyone stare at your suit. And why are you eating like that?" I looked down at my hand. I was holding a small canapé, a crab cake on a little piece of toast. It was finger food. Everyone in the room was eating them with their fingers. "I am just eating an appetizer," I said. "Use a fork," Tiana whispered harshly, slapping my hand down. "You are embarrassing me. You are eating with your hands like a field hand. These are important people, Dad. This is the mayor. This is the bank president. Act like you have some class. Act like you belong in a house like this, even if you do not anymore." The words hung in the air between us. Field hand, class, belong. She was ashamed of me. She wasn't just embarrassed by my suit. She was ashamed of my blackness. She was ashamed of my history. She was ashamed of the hands that had held her when she was a baby, because those hands had known dirt and labor. She had bought into Victoria's world so completely that she now viewed her own father through the lens of their bigotry. I looked at the crab cake in my hand. I looked at my daughter. I looked at the fork lying on the table next to us. I carefully placed the crab cake back on the tray. I wiped my hands on a napkin. "I am sorry, Tiana," I said softly. "I did not mean to ruin your image. I will use a fork next time." She let out a sigh of relief. Thank you, Dad. Just try to blend in, okay? Stay over here. I have to go find Blake. He is making a toast soon." She turned and walked away. She walked back into the light, back to her husband, back to the people who laughed at me. She left me in the shadows near the kitchen door. I stood there alone. The music swelled. The laughter grew louder. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't pain anymore. It wasn't sadness. It was clarity. Absolute crystalline clarity. They had taken everything from me. My home, my pride, my history. And now they had tried to take my dignity. They had tried to reduce me to a caricature, a gardener, a fool, an embarrassment. I reached into the inside pocket of my cheap polyester suit. My fingers closed around the thick red envelope. It felt hot to the touch. "You want a show?" I thought, watching Blake climb onto the small stage they had set up. "You want to talk about who belongs here? You want to talk about class?" Blake tapped his glass with a spoon. The room went quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blake shouted, his face flushed with victory. "Thank you all for coming to our humble abode." I stepped out of the shadows. I smoothed my tie. I started walking toward the stage. I was done blending in. I was done being the gardener. It was time for the landlord to speak, and I had a feeling that what I had to say was going to ruin their appetite. The applause for Blake's toast died down, leaving a self-satisfied silence in the room. He stood there beaming, raising his glass to the ceiling as if he were a king, accepting the adoration of his subjects. Victoria was clapping the loudest, her jewelry rattling with the force of her enthusiasm. Tiana looked relieved that the speech was over without incident. They thought the show was finished. They thought they could go back to their drinking and their gossip. But I was already moving. I walked out of the shadows near the kitchen. My footsteps were heavy and deliberate on the hardwood floor. I didn't look at Tiana, who was widening her eyes in silent panic. I didn't look at the guests who parted ways for me, pulling back their expensive fabrics so they wouldn't brush against my cheap polyester suit. I kept my eyes locked on the stage. The sound of my approach caught Blake's attention. He looked down from his perch, his smile faltering just a fraction. He saw the old man in the gray suit coming toward him, and for a second I saw a flicker of annoyance. He didn't want to share the spotlight. He didn't want the gardener interrupting the coronation. I climbed the 3 small steps onto the stage. The microphone stand was right there. I reached out and took the mic. The feedback squealed a high-pitched shriek that made half the room wince and cover their ears. It was a perfect way to get their attention. Silence fell over the ballroom instantly. 200 faces turned toward me. I saw the mix of pity and amusement in their eyes. They expected a rambling speech from a senile old man. They expected me to cry or to stutter or to embarrass myself further. I could see Victoria whispering something to the person next to her, probably a joke about how they should have hired security to keep me off the stage. I looked out at the crowd. I looked at the crystal chandeliers I had hung. I looked at the crown molding I had installed. And then I looked at Blake standing next to me, swirling his whiskey, impatient for me to leave. I cleared my throat. My voice was deep and steady, the voice I used to command construction sites with 300 men. "Excuse me, everyone," I said. "I know I am not on the schedule. I know I am just the old man in the cheap suit. But a housewarming isn't complete without a gift." A ripple of polite laughter went through the room. They thought it was sweet. They thought it was pathetic. Blake rolled his eyes, but forced a smile. "That is very kind, Reggie, but you really didn't have to. We know you are on a fixed income." He said it loud enough for the front row to hear. Another dig. Another reminder of my place. I reached into my jacket pocket. I moved slowly, letting the tension build. I pulled out the thick red envelope. It was heavy cardstock embossed with a gold seal. It looked expensive. It looked important. I turned to Blake. I held the envelope out with both hands. I didn't have to. "Blake, you are right," I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room without a tremor. "But I wanted to. Because this house means everything to me, and I wanted to give something special to the true owner of this property." Blake's eyes locked onto the envelope. I saw the greed flare up in his pupils. He saw the thickness of the packet. He saw the gold seal. And in his arrogant, broke mind, he immediately jumped to one conclusion. He thought it was money. He thought I had cashed out my retirement. He thought I had sold my truck. He thought I was handing him a check to buy his affection, to buy my way back into the family. He reached out and snatched the envelope from my hands. His grip was eager. "Wow, Reggie," he said, his voice dripping with false gratitude. "That is really generous of you. You shouldn't have." "Open it," I said. "I want everyone to see." Tiana took a step forward from the crowd. "Dad," she whispered loud enough for me to hear. "Dad, don't." She thought I was giving them my life savings. She thought I was bankrupting myself for them. Even now she underestimated me. Blake didn't listen to her. He tore the seal with his thumb. He ripped the red paper open. He reached inside and pulled out the stack of documents. The room was dead silent. Everyone was leaning forward, waiting to see the check, waiting to see how many zeros were on it. Blake unfolded the papers. He stared at the top page. His smile froze. It didn't disappear instantly. It just stuck there like a glitch on a computer screen. He blinked. He read the first line, then he read the second. His face went pale. All the color drained out of his cheeks, leaving him looking like a wax figure. His hands started to shake. The papers rustled in the silence. "What is this?" he whispered. I leaned into the microphone. "It is not a check, Blake," I said, my voice booming through the hall. "It is an invoice." A gasp went through the crowd. Blake looked up at me, his eyes wide with confusion and horror. "An invoice for what?" "For the rent," I said, calmly. I took a step closer to him, invading his personal space, forcing him to look at me. "You see, Blake, when I gave Tiana the house 5 years ago, I gave her the structure, the wood, the glass, the brick, but I kept the land. The dirt you are standing on belongs to Carter Holdings, LLC. I pointed to the document in his hand. "That is the ground lease agreement. For the last 5 years, the rent was subsidized at $1 a year because I lived here. It was a family discount. But the lease has a very specific clause. Clause 4, Section B. It states that if the primary resident is anyone other than Reginald Carter, the rent adjusts immediately to the current commercial market rate." I paused, letting the words sink in. I looked at Victoria, who had dropped her wine glass. I looked at Tiana, who had her hands over her mouth. "You kicked me out on Sunday," I continued. "You told me this was your house now. You told me I was trespassing. Well, Blake, you got what you wanted. I moved out. And the moment I drove my truck off this property, the family discount expired." Blake looked back down at the papers. He was flipping through them frantically, trying to find a loophole, trying to find a joke. "This says," he stammered, "this says $60,000. Per month," I corrected him. $60,000 per month. That is the market rate for 3 acres of prime residential land in this zip code. And since you failed to notify the landlord of the change in occupancy within 24 hours as required by the contract, you triggered the penalty clause." I pointed to the bottom line. The number was bold and black. "The penalty is retroactive for the entire 5-year term of the lease due to breach of contract," I said. "That bill in your hand is for 5 years of back rent at commercial rates plus interest, plus the penalty fees." Blake's knees buckled. He grabbed the podium to stop himself from falling. He looked at the number. $450,000, he choked out. The room erupted. It wasn't laughter this time. It was a collective murmur of shock. People were whispering, pointing, pulling out their phones to record. The guests who had looked at me with disdain were now looking at me with fear. They realized instantly that the old man in the cheap suit wasn't a gardener. He was a shark, but I wasn't done. I reached over and tapped the paper in Blake's trembling hand. "And Blake, do not forget the last page. The priority lien. It says that if the rent is not paid in full within 24 hours of notification, the landowner has the right to foreclose on all improvements to the land." I smiled, a cold, terrifying smile. "That means if you do not pay me $450,000 by tomorrow morning, I am seizing the house. I am seizing the pool you are digging. I am seizing the garage. I am evicting you." Blake looked at me. He looked at his wife. He looked at his parents. He realized the trap had snapped shut. He realized that the $2.5 million he had borrowed, the money he had already spent on debts and cars and trips, was gone. And now he owed $500,000 more to the man he had mocked. "You can't do this," he screamed, his voice cracking. "We have a mortgage. We have a bank loan." I leaned into the mic one last time. "The bank is second in line, son. I am the landlord. And the rent is due." I turned and walked off the stage. The silence was broken only by the sound of my footsteps and the sound of Victoria sobbing in the corner. I didn't look back. I had delivered the gift. Now I just had to wait for them to choke on it. Blake stared at the red paper in his hand, and for a moment the only sound in the room was the hum of the air conditioning. Then a laugh bubbled up from his throat. It was a wet, ugly sound born of panic and disbelief. He crumpled the invoice in his fist and threw it onto the floor of the stage. "You are insane," he shouted, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and fear. "You are actually senile. What land? What lease? This is my house, Reggie. Mine and Tiana's. We have the deed. We have the mortgage. We have the bank's approval. Do you think you can just walk in here with some piece of paper you printed off the internet and scare me?" He turned to the crowd, spreading his arms wide, trying to rally them to his side. "Everyone listen to this," he yelled, pointing a finger at me. "My father-in-law has finally lost it. He thinks he can charge us rent for our own home. He thinks he owns the ground we are standing on. It is sad, really. It is pathetic." A few of his friends chuckled nervously, but most of the room remained dead silent. They were watching me. They saw that I was not shouting. They saw that I was not shaking. I was standing there with my hands clasped behind my back, watching Blake unravel like a cheap sweater. "Get out," Blake hissed, leaning into my face. "Get out before I call security and have you thrown out like the trash you are. You are ruining my party. You are ruining my night." I did not move. I simply looked past him toward the double doors at the back of the ballroom. "I do not think I will be leaving just yet, Blake," I said calmly. "But you might want to hold on to that thought." The doors swung open with a heavy thud that echoed off the walls. The crowd parted instantly, instinctively moving away from the men who walked through. Leading the pack was Marcus Thorne. He was not wearing a party suit. He was wearing his litigation armor, a charcoal gray three-piece suit that screamed authority. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand and a stack of legal binders in the other. But it was the men behind him that made Blake's blood run cold. Two uniformed sheriff's deputies walked in, their hands resting on their belts, their faces stoic and unreadable. Behind them was a man in a windbreaker with the words "Process Server" stenciled on the back. The music stopped completely. The string quartet lowered their bows. The waiters froze with trays of champagne in their hands. Marcus walked straight to the stage. He did not look at the guests. He did not look at the decorations. He walked with the singular focus of a shark closing in on a wounded seal. He climbed the steps and stood next to me. He placed the briefcase on the podium, pushing Blake's whiskey glass aside. "Mr. Evans," Marcus said, his voice projecting clearly without the need for a microphone. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding the ownership of this estate. My client, Mr. Carter, asked me to clarify the situation for you and your guests." Blake looked at the deputies and then at Marcus. "Who are you?" he stammered. "I am the attorney representing Carter Holdings, LLC, the legal owner of the 3 acres of land designated as Parcel 404, Marcus replied. "And these gentlemen are here to ensure that the writ of execution I am about to serve is received without incident." Blake laughed again, but it sounded like a sob. "Carter Holdings. That is just Reggie. It is the same thing. He gave us the house." Marcus opened the binder. He pulled out a document with a blue cover and held it up. "Incorrect," Marcus said. "Mr. Carter executed a deed of severance 5 years ago. He transferred the title of the residential improvements, meaning the house itself, to his daughter, Tiana Carter. However, the land, the driveway, the gardens, and the underlying soil were retained by Carter Holdings, LLC. Marcus turned to Tiana, who was standing at the edge of the stage, clutching her pearls. "Mrs. Evans, did you read the title report when you accepted the deed? Did you notice that the property description was limited to the structure only? Did you read the ground lease agreement that was attached as an rider to the deed?" Tiana shook her head, her eyes wide with terror. "I thought Dad handled it. I just signed where he told me to." Marcus nodded. "Precisely. And because you did not read it, you missed Clause 4, the residency clause." He turned back to the room, addressing the silent guests as if he were in a courtroom. "This clause states that the ground rent for this property is subsidized at a nominal rate of $1 per year, solely on the condition that Reginald Carter remains the primary resident of the dwelling. It is a conditional benefit, a gift." Marcus paused and looked at Blake. "However, on Sunday evening, you forcibly evicted the primary resident. You demanded he leave. You coerced him into signing a waiver of residency. By doing so, you terminated the subsidy." Blake's face was a mask of sweat and terror. "So what?" he whispered. "So we pay rent. How much could it be for some dirt?" A few $100. Marcus smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who knows the prey has nowhere to run. The lease stipulates that upon termination of the subsidy, the rental rate reverts to the current commercial market value for this zoning district, Marcus explained. This is a 3-acre estate in the most exclusive zip code in the state. The land is zoned for mixed residential and commercial use. He pulled out an appraisal report and slapped it onto the podium. Current market value for a ground lease of this magnitude is $60,000 per month. A gasp went through the room. Someone dropped a glass and it shattered, but no one looked down. 60,000, Blake choked out. That is impossible. That is robbery. It is the market rate, Marcus said coldly. And since you have been occupying the land without a valid subsidized lease for the past 5 years, technically the retroactive clause kicks in due to your breach of contract. You failed to notify the landlord of the change in status. You failed to negotiate a new lease. Therefore, the penalty rate applies. He picked up the red envelope from the floor where Blake had thrown it. He dusted it off and handed it back to him. That invoice is not a suggestion, Mr. Evans. It is a demand for payment. 5 years of back rent calculated at the commercial rate plus the penalty for unauthorized occupancy and breach of contract. Blake looked at the paper again. The numbers swam before his eyes. $450,000, Marcus stated. Payable immediately. The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. The guests who had been drinking Blake's wine and laughing at my suit were now doing the math in their heads. They were realizing that the man they had mocked was not a gardener. He was the man who owned the ground beneath their feet. I stepped forward, taking the microphone from the stand. You called me the help, Blake, I said, my voice low and dangerous. You told your friends I was the gardener. You let my daughter treat me like an embarrassment because I drove a truck and wore a cheap suit. I looked out at the crowd, at the faces of the people who had judged me. I am not the gardener, I said. I am the landlord, and I am the one who decides who stays and who goes. Blake looked around the room, desperate for an escape, desperate for someone to tell him this was a nightmare. He looked at his mother, Victoria, who was slumped in a chair, fanning herself rapidly. He looked at Tiana, who was crying silently, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. This is illegal, he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. You cannot do this. We have rights. We have a mortgage. The bank owns this house. I laughed. It was a deep, rich sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. The bank owns the house, Blake. I agreed. But I own the road that leads to it. I own the dirt under the foundation. I own the pipes that bring the water and the wires that bring the electricity. Without my land, your house is just a pile of wood floating in the air. Marcus stepped forward again, handing a document to the lead sheriff deputy. Mr. Evans, under the terms of the priority lien, signed by all parties, including yourself, when you accepted the transfer of the deed, the landowner has the right to seize all assets on the property to satisfy the debt. The deputy stepped onto the stage. His hand rested on his handcuffs. Mr. Evans, Mrs. Evans, he said, his voice flat and authoritative. I have a writ here for the immediate seizure of the structure located at 12 Oakwood Lane. You are in default of your ground lease. You have 24 minutes to vacate the premises, or you will be removed for trespassing. Trespassing. The word Blake had used on me. The word he had thrown in my face. Now it was being used to end his life. Blake looked at me. His arrogance was gone. His pride was gone. All that was left was a scared little boy who had played a game he didn't understand. Reggie, please, he whispered. We don't have that kind of money. You know we don't. We spent the loan. We spent everything. I know I said, I watched you spend it. I watched you buy the cars. I watched you go to Paris. I watched you dig up my roses. I leaned in close so only he could hear me. I hope you enjoyed the party, Blake, because the bill has arrived, and I do not accept credit. Blake looked at the sheriff deputies and then back at me with eyes that were bulging from his skull. He was cornered like a rat in a trap, but he still had one desperate card to play, or at least he thought he did. He lunged toward me, grabbing the lapels of my cheap polyester suit with his sweaty hands. You cannot touch this house, he screamed, spit flying from his mouth. You are insane, old man. I mortgaged this property. The First National Bank holds the note on this house. They have a $2.5 million lien on this structure. Do you think a major bank is going to let some gardener with a fake lease kick me out? The bank protects me. The bank is my partner. He turned to the crowd, his voice rising to a hysterical pitch. Everyone listen to me. This is a joke. My father-in-law is trying to scare us, but we have the backing of one of the largest financial institutions in the state. We are untouchable. The bank will sue him into oblivion if he tries to interfere with their collateral. I did not push him away. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at his hands on my suit and then up at his face. I felt a strange kind of pity for him. It was the pity you feel for a child who thinks he can stop the tide with a plastic shovel. He really believed that borrowing money made him powerful. He really believed that debt was an asset. He didn't understand that the bank is not a partner. The bank is a predator, and he was just the meal. Blake, I said calmly, removing his hands from my jacket, one finger at a time. You are right about one thing. The bank does have a lien, but you forgot to read the fine print on that loan application, just like you forgot to read the deed. I nodded to Marcus. It was time to drop the hammer. It was time to show him that the safety net he thought he had was actually a noose. Marcus stepped forward, checking his watch with the precision of an executioner. He pulled a sleek black smartphone from his pocket and tapped the screen. Actually, Mr. Evans, Marcus said, his voice cutting through Blake's shouting. The bank is no longer your partner. In fact, as of 3 minutes ago, the bank has become your executioner. Blake froze. What are you talking about? Marcus held up the phone, showing a notification from the bank's legal department. When you signed your loan documents, you agreed to a specific rider called the default acceleration clause. Marcus explained, speaking slowly so the terrified crowd could understand every word. This clause states that if any secondary lien or legal encumbrance is placed on the property title without the bank's prior written consent, the loan is immediately considered in default. Marcus pointed at the red envelope on the floor. The moment I served you with that notice of the priority lien for unpaid ground rent, we electronically filed the lien with the county clerk. It went into the system 5 minutes ago. The bank's automated system flagged the title change instantly. Blake shook his head, backing away. No, that does not mean anything. It is just paperwork. It means everything, Marcus corrected him. It means the bank has triggered the acceleration clause. They have recalled the loan, Mr. Evans. The entire $2.5 million plus interest and early termination fees is due right now. Blake laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. You are lying. They can't ask for it all back at once. We have a 30-year term. Not anymore, Marcus said. And since the bank knows you do not have the liquidity to pay it back, they have exercised their right to offset. They have initiated an immediate freeze and seizure of all accounts associated with the borrowers to recover their funds. A chime sounded from Tiana's purse. It was a sharp digital ping that echoed in the silent ballroom. Then another chime. Then a buzzing from Blake's pocket. Tiana fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking so hard she almost dropped it. She stared at the screen, and her knees gave out. She collapsed onto the stage, sitting in a heap of expensive fabric. Blake, she whispered, her voice filled with horror. My account. The checking account. It is gone. What do you mean it is gone? Blake snapped, pulling out his own phone. It says zero, Tiana cried, holding up the screen. No, wait. It says negative. It says negative $2.5 million. They took everything, Blake. They took the money for the catering. They took the money for the bills. They locked the accounts. Blake stared at his own phone. He was tapping furiously, trying to log into his trading app, trying to check his offshore accounts, trying to find a cent that wasn't frozen. My cards, he muttered. My platinum card, it says suspended. My crypto wallet, it is locked. Marcus closed his binder with a snap. The bank moves fast when they think their money is at risk, Mr. Evans, he said. They saw a priority lien from the landowner and they panicked. They grabbed every asset they could find before we could foreclose. You are broke, Blake. You are not just broke. You are destitute. You have no money, you have no credit, and as of right now you have no home. The reality of the situation washed over the room like a cold wave. The guests looked at the Evans family with a mixture of horror and disgust. They realized that the champagne they were drinking was paid for with money that didn't exist. They realized they were standing in a house of cards that was collapsing in real time. But Victoria Evans was not a woman who accepted defeat easily. She was standing by the bar, clutching an empty wine glass, her face a mask of denial. She refused to believe that her son had failed. She refused to believe that the party was over. "This is ridiculous," she screeched, her voice shrill and piercing. "This is just a computer error. Blake, fix it. Call the bank president. Tell him who we are." Blake didn't answer. He was staring at his phone, paralyzed. "Fine," Victoria shouted. "If you won't fix it, I will keep the party going until this is sorted out. We are not going to let this ruin our night." She turned to the head bartender, a young man who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. "You," she commanded, slamming her hand on the bar. "Open the reserve champagne, the Dom Perignon. Open all of it. Pour a glass for everyone. We are going to toast to my son's success and ignore these jealous peasants." The bartender hesitated, looking at me, then at Marcus, then at the police officers. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I can't do that." The catering manager just got a notification. The credit card on file for the deposit was declined. The payment was reversed. Victoria's eyes bulged. "Declined. How dare you? That is a black card. It has no limit." She grabbed her purse and pulled out her own credit card. It was gold and shiny, a symbol of the status she craved. Here she yelled, thrusting it at the bartender. "Put it on mine! I will buy every bottle in this house. I will buy this bar. Just pour the damn wine." The bartender took the card. He swiped it through the portable reader on the counter. The machine beeped. A long, harsh sound. "Declined," the bartender said, holding the card up. "Try it again," Victoria screamed. "It is a mistake." He swiped it again. Beep. "Declined." "Try another one," she demanded, digging into her purse, frantically pulling out card after card. Visa, MasterCard, Amex. She threw them on the bar like she was dealing a poker hand. The bartender swiped them one by one. Beep, beep, beep. Declined, declined. Stolen card reported. Account frozen. The mechanical voice of the machine seemed to echo through the ballroom, pronouncing judgment on the Evans family. Victoria stood there, surrounded by useless plastic, breathing heavily. She looked at the guests. She saw their faces. She didn't see admiration anymore. She saw revulsion. She saw the look people give to a beggar who tries to enter a 5-star hotel. "This cannot be happening," she whispered. "We are the Evans family. We are important." I stepped forward, my voice cutting through her delusion. "You are trespassers, Victoria," I said. "You are squatters. And you are out of time." Chaos erupted. It wasn't a riot, it was an exodus. The guests realized that the free ride was over. They realized that being associated with Blake Evans was social suicide. They started moving toward the doors, pushing and shoving to get away from the blast zone. I saw the mayor slipping out the side exit. I saw Blake's business partners checking their phones, probably deleting his number. The facade had cracked, and the rats were fleeing the sinking ship. Blake stood in the center of the empty stage, holding his frozen phone, watching his kingdom crumble. Tiana sat on the floor, weeping into her hands. And Victoria stood at the bar, clutching her declined cards, staring into the abyss of her own bankruptcy. I looked at Marcus. "Finish it," I said. Preston Evans had always been a man who believed his own hype. He believed he was a business tycoon despite his bankruptcies. He believed he was a gentleman despite his boorish behavior. And in that moment, he believed he could solve his problems with violence. The sight of his wife humiliated and his son broken was too much for his alcohol-soaked brain to process. He looked at me standing on the stage, the man he had called a gardener, and he snapped. "You dirty thief!" Preston roared, his face turning a violent shade of purple. "You planned this. You set us up. You ruin everything you touch." He threw his heavy crystal tumbler at me. It missed my head by inches, shattering against the wall behind me, showering the stage with shards of glass and expensive scotch. The crowd screamed and scattered. But Preston did not stop. He charged toward the stage, his fists clenched, his eyes wild with a drunken fury. He moved with the clumsy speed of a man who has never been in a real fight but is used to bullying people who cannot fight back. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood my ground, my hands still clasped behind my back. I have spent 40 years on construction sites breaking up fights between steelworkers and bricklayers. A soft man in a tuxedo was not going to intimidate me. Preston reached the steps, his hand reaching for my throat. "I am going to kill you," he screamed. "I am going to tear you apart." But he never made it to the top step. The two sheriff deputies moved with a speed and efficiency that was terrifying to behold. One of them grabbed Preston's arm, twisting it behind his back with a sickening pop. The other swept his legs out from under him. Preston hit the hardwood floor face first with a heavy thud that silenced the room. "Get off me!" he bellowed, thrashing against the weight of the officers. "Do you know who I am? I am Preston Evans. I will have your badges. You are under arrest for assault and disorderly conduct," the deputy stated calmly, pressing Preston's face into the floor as he snapped the handcuffs onto his wrists. "You have the right to remain silent, sir, and I strongly suggest you use it." Victoria let out a shriek of horror, covering her mouth with her hands. "My husband," she cried. "You are hurting him. He has a heart condition. He has a violence condition." Marcus corrected her, stepping over Preston's prone body to stand next to me. "And he is now going to jail." Marcus turned his attention to Tiana. She was still sitting on the floor of the stage, trembling, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. She looked at her father-in-law in handcuffs, and then she looked at me. Her eyes were filled with a pleading desperation. "Dad, stop them," she begged. "Please tell them to stop. This has gone too far. Preston is family. He is not my family," I said, cold and unyielding. "And neither are you, Tiana, not anymore." Marcus opened his legal binder again. He pulled out a single sheet of paper protected by a plastic sleeve. He held it up to the light so Tiana could see it clearly. "Speaking of going too far, Mrs. Evans," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register, "we need to discuss the paperwork you submitted to the bank to secure that loan." Tiana froze. "What paperwork?" "Specifically the residency waiver affidavit," Marcus said. "The document that stated Reginald Carter had voluntarily vacated the property and relinquished all legal claims to residency." "I signed that," Tiana whispered. "No, Dad signed it. I saw him. He signed it at the dinner table." Marcus shook his head. "Your father signed a quitclaim deed, yes, a document that Blake prepared. But the bank required a separate notarized affidavit to close the loan so quickly, an affidavit that required a witness and a notary seal." He walked closer to her, holding the paper inches from her face. "This document is dated 3 days ago. It bears the signature of Reginald Carter. But the forensic handwriting analysis we commissioned this morning proves conclusively that this signature does not match your father's hand. In fact, the pressure points and the loop on the R are a perfect match for your handwriting, Tiana." Tiana stopped breathing. The room was so quiet, you could hear the rain starting to fall outside again. "Forging a signature on a federal loan application is a felony," Marcus stated clearly. "It is mortgage fraud. It is identity theft. And since the amount defrauded exceeds $1 million, you are looking at a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in federal prison." Tiana looked at Blake, but he was staring at his shoes, unable to meet her eyes. He knew. He knew she had done it. He had probably told her to do it. "I did it for us," Tiana whispered, her voice barely audible. "We needed the money fast. The bank said we needed one more form. Dad was already gone. I thought it was just a formality." "It was a crime," Marcus said, snapping the binder shut. "And we have already submitted the evidence to the district attorney." I stepped forward, taking the microphone one last time. The weight of the moment settled on my shoulders. I looked at the wreckage of the party, the spilled wine, the broken glass. The guests huddled in corners, terrified of being associated with the criminals in the center of the room. "I am invoking my rights as the landowner." I announced, my voice echoing through the cavernous hall. "I am exercising the eviction clause of the ground lease immediately." I turned to the lead deputy. "Officer, I want these trespassers removed from my property. I want them gone. And I want everyone else out. Right now." The deputy nodded. "You heard the man," he shouted, addressing the crowd. "This is now a crime scene and an eviction zone. Everyone who does not live here needs to vacate the premises immediately. You have 30 minutes to get your cars and get off this property, or you will be cited for trespassing." Panic took over. It was not a chaotic stampede, but a frantic, desperate rush for the exits. The socialites and business tycoons, the people Victoria had tried so hard to impress, could not get away fast enough. They grabbed their purses and their coats, pushing past each other to get to the door. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't say thank you. They ran like rats fleeing a sinking ship. I watched them go. I watched the illusion of the Evans family empire dissolve into taillights, fading down the driveway. Within 10 minutes, the room was empty, save for the police, Marcus, and the 4 people who had betrayed me. Preston was being hauled up by the deputies, still cursing and spitting. Victoria was following them, sobbing about her reputation. Blake stood alone near the podium, looking like a man who had just woken up from a dream to find himself in a nightmare. And Tiana. Tiana crawled toward me. She moved on her hands and knees across the floor, dragging her expensive dress through the spilled champagne and broken glass. She reached for my legs, wrapping her arms around my ankles, burying her face in my shoes. "Daddy, please," she sobbed, her body shaking with the force of her grief. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. I was scared. Blake said it would be okay. Please, Daddy, do not let them take me to jail. Do not let them take the house. I have nowhere to go." I looked down at her. I remembered the day she was born. I remembered promising to protect her from the world. But I had failed to protect her from herself. I had failed to teach her that character matters more than status. I gently but firmly pulled my legs away from her grasp. I took a step back, creating a distance between us that was wider than the ocean. "You are not a child, Tiana," I said, my voice devoid of anger, devoid of love, just empty. "You are a grown woman who made a choice. You chose a thief for a husband. You chose a liar for a mother-in-law. And you chose greed over your own father." She looked up at me, her face streaked with mascara, her eyes wide and pleading. "But I am your daughter." "No," I said, turning my back on her. "You are just a tenant who didn't pay the rent." I walked away. I walked out the front door past the valet stand where my truck was waiting. I got in and started the engine. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't look back at the daughter collapsing on the floor. I drove away, leaving them to the darkness they had created. 1 week is a long time when you are sleeping on a mattress that smells like mildew and regret. It had been exactly 7 days since the lights went out on the Evans Empire. 7 days since the police escorted them off my property and into the back of a squad car. Preston and Victoria were currently guests of the state awaiting a bail hearing that would never come because they had no assets to pledge. Blake had managed to post bond by pawning his Rolex and Tiana's engagement ring, but his freedom was temporary. The federal indictment for mortgage fraud was coming down the pipe like a freight train. I knew exactly where they were staying. It was the Starlight Motel. The same flea-infested roadside dump they had tried to force me into. Karma has a sense of humor, and she is not subtle. I imagined Blake sitting in that cramped room, listening to the highway traffic, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, realizing that this was his life now. No more Italian sports cars. No more vintage scotch. Just the hum of a broken ice machine and the crushing weight of his own stupidity. I was sitting on the balcony of my penthouse drinking coffee and reading the morning financial report when the concierge buzzed me. He told me I had a visitor. He said she refused to give her name, but she claimed to be family. He sounded hesitant. He said she did not meet the dress code. "Send her up," I said. When Tiana walked through the door 10 minutes later, I almost didn't recognize her. The woman who had stood in the rain directing the destruction of my garden in a $3,000 trench coat was gone. In her place was a ghost. Her hair was matted and pulled back in a messy knot. She was wearing jeans that were stained at the hem and a sweater that looked like it had been pulled out of a laundry hamper. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. She looked like a refugee from a war zone. She stood in the entryway of the suite, looking around at the opulence. She looked at the marble floors, the art on the walls, the view of the city skyline. Then she looked at me. I was wearing a silk robe, sitting in a leather armchair, looking every inch the man she had forgotten I was. "Dad," she whispered. Her voice was cracked and dry. I did not get up. I did not offer her a seat. I did not offer her water. I just watched her. "Hello, Tiana," I said. She took a step forward and then her legs seemed to give out. She sank to her knees on the carpet. It was a theatrical gesture, but the exhaustion behind it was real. "We have nothing, Dad," she sobbed. "Nothing. The bank took the accounts. They towed the cars this morning. Blake is falling apart. He just sits there staring at the wall. We haven't eaten a real meal in 2 days. They kicked Blake's parents out of the house they were squatting in before they came to us. Everyone is gone." I took a sip of my coffee. It was hot and strong. "That sounds difficult," I said. "Difficult," she cried, her voice rising to a shriek. "It is hell. We are at the Starlight, Dad. The Starlight. There are drug dealers in the parking lot. The water is brown. How can you let your daughter live like that?" I set my cup down. The sound of the ceramic hitting the saucer was sharp in the quiet room. "I seem to recall you thought the Starlight was a perfectly acceptable establishment," I said. You told me it was convenient. You told me it was safe. You told me I would be comfortable there. If it was good enough for your father, why isn't it good enough for you?" She flinched as if I had slapped her. "That was different," she stammered. "You are old. You didn't need much. We have a life. We have futures." "You had a future," I corrected her. "You had a home. You had a father who would have given you the world if you had just asked for it with respect. Instead, you tried to take it with theft." She crawled closer, dragging herself across the rug. "I am sorry," she begged. "I am so sorry. I was stupid. I listened to Blake. I listened to Victoria. They told me it was the only way. They said you were holding us back. They said you didn't understand money. I was brainwashed, Dad. Please, you have to believe me. I am your little girl." I looked at her. I looked for the little girl who used to bring me lemonade when I was mowing the lawn. I looked for the teenager I taught to drive, but all I saw was the woman who forged my signature. All I saw was the woman who stood by while her husband mocked me. "You are not brainwashed, Tiana," I said, my voice hard as granite. "You are greedy. There is a difference. Brainwashed people don't forge federal documents. Brainwashed people don't watch excavators tear up their mother's rose garden. You made choices. Every single step of the way you chose them over me. But I learned my lesson," she wept. "I swear I learned. I will leave Blake. I will testify against him. I will do whatever you want. Just please let me come home. Let me come back to the villa, or pay off the debt. You have millions, Dad. I know you do. You can fix this with the stroke of a pen." There it was. Even in her apology, she was reaching for my wallet. She wasn't sorry she hurt me. She was sorry the scheme failed. She didn't want forgiveness. She wanted a bailout. I stood up and walked over to the desk. Tiana watched me, her eyes lighting up with hope. She thought I was going for the checkbook. She thought Daddy was going to make the bad men go away just like I did when she was 6. I opened the drawer. I pulled out a small white envelope. I walked back to her and held it out. "Get up," I commanded. She scrambled to her feet, wiping her hands on her jeans. She reached for the envelope, trembling. "Is this a check?" she asked breathlessly. "Is it enough to clear the lien?" "Open it," I said. She tore it open. Her fingers shook so hard she dropped the contents on the floor. It wasn't a check. It was a Greyhound bus ticket. One way to a city 3 states over. And a folded brochure for a temp agency that hired unskilled labor for factory work. She stared at the ticket lying on the Persian rug. She looked up at me, her face twisting in confusion. "What is this?" she asked. "It is a fresh start," I said. "Bus ticket," Tiana whispered. "You are giving me a bus ticket. I am giving you an opportunity," I said. "You said you wanted a future. Well, there it is. That bus leaves in 2 hours. The job agency is in a town where nobody knows your name. Nobody knows you are a forger. Nobody knows you are a failed socialite. You can go there. You can get a job. You can rent a small apartment. And you can pay for it with money you earned with your own sweat." I walked to the door and opened it. "This is the last thing I will ever give you, Tiana. It is the lesson I should have taught you 20 years ago. It is the lesson of self-reliance." She looked at the open door. She looked at the ticket. She looked at me. "You are a monster," she hissed, the tears drying up instantly, replaced by a cold hatred. "You are a cruel, heartless old man. I hope you die alone in this tower." I smiled. "I will die peaceful, Tiana, because I owe nothing to no one." She snatched the ticket from the floor. She didn't look at me again. She walked out the door, her head down, defeated but alive. I closed the door. I locked it. I walked back to the balcony and looked out at the city. I was alone. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't lonely. I was free. 3 years have passed since I stood on the balcony of the penthouse and watched my daughter walk away with a bus ticket in her hand. Time has a way of sorting the wheat from the chaff, and justice, though sometimes slow, eventually arrives with a hammer. Blake Evans is currently serving a 12-year sentence in a federal correctional facility. The bank did not take kindly to being defrauded of $2.5 million. His lawyer tried to argue that he was a victim of circumstances, but the judge, a stern woman who had seen too many con artists, saw right through him. Blake spends his days working in the prison laundry, earning 12 cents an hour, which is probably the first honest money he has ever made. Preston and Victoria did not fare much better. With no home, no credit, and a son in prison, they became wards of the state. They were placed in a government-funded nursing home on the outskirts of the city. It is not a terrible place, but it is certainly not the luxury lifestyle they felt entitled to. I heard through the grapevine that Victoria spends her days telling anyone who will listen about the mansion she used to own and the cruel gardener who stole it from her. Nobody believes her. And Tiana. My investigators tell me she never used the bus ticket. She stayed in the city. She got a job as a cashier at a discount supermarket chain. She lives in a studio apartment with 3 roommates. She works double shifts trying to pay off the restitution order the court handed down for her part in the fraud. I saw a picture of her recently taken from a distance. She looks tired. She looks older. But for the first time in her life, she looks like someone who is standing on her own 2 feet. Maybe one day she will understand that the hard road was the only road that led anywhere real. As for the villa, it is gone. I did not want to live in a house stained by betrayal. I did not want to walk through rooms where my wife's memory had been insulted. 6 months after the eviction, I sold the entire estate to a developer for $4 million. They tore down the house I built. They filled in the pool Blake tried to dig. They erased the physical evidence of the Evans family's greed. I took half of that money and established the Beatrice Carter Foundation. We provide grants for minority students who want to study architecture and engineering. We build affordable housing for seniors who have been displaced by gentrification. Every brick laid in my wife's name is a victory over the people who tried to erase her. With the rest of the money, I bought myself a new home, but it doesn't have a foundation. It has wheels. I bought a 45-foot luxury RV. It has a king-sized bed, a full kitchen, and a view that changes every morning. I have seen the Grand Canyon at sunrise. I have parked on the beaches of the Pacific Northwest. I have driven through the redwood forests. I am living the life I worked 40 years to afford, and I am doing it on my own terms. But I am not doing it alone. Sitting in the passenger seat next to me is Sarah. We met 2 years ago at a jazz festival in New Orleans. She is a retired librarian, a widow like me who loves books, old movies, and quiet mornings. She doesn't care about my money. She doesn't care about my past. She just likes the man who drives the truck. We were parked overlooking a canyon in Arizona last week, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Sarah poured 2 cups of coffee and handed me one. "Reggie," she said, looking out at the vastness of the world. "Do you ever miss it? The big house. The settled life." I took a sip of coffee. I thought about the marble floors. I thought about the crystal chandeliers. And then I thought about the storage room where I slept on a cot. "No, Sarah," I said, smiling. "I do not miss the house. A house is just walls. A home is where you are respected. A home is where you are safe." I reached over and took her hand. Her skin was warm and soft. "I found my home," I said. The road stretched out in front of us, an endless ribbon of asphalt leading to new adventures. I put the truck in gear and pulled out onto the highway. The engine roared a sound of freedom. I learned a hard lesson at 69 years old. I learned that blood does not make you family. Loyalty makes you family. Respect makes you family. Love that does not ask for a check makes you family. I left my daughter behind not because I stopped loving her, but because I finally started loving myself enough to say no. I reclaimed my dignity. I reclaimed my life. And in the end, that is the only legacy that truly matters. So to anyone out there who feels trapped by the expectations of people who do not value you, to anyone who is being used by family members who see you as an ATM instead of a human being, I have one message for you. Check the lease, know your worth, and do not be afraid to change the locks. The view from the driver's seat is beautiful when you are the one holding the wheel. Do you think I was too harsh on Tiana by leaving her with nothing but a bus ticket? Should I have given her another chance, or did she get exactly what she deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of justice, please like and subscribe for more. Until next time, keep building your own life on your own land. The most profound lesson I learned wasn't about real estate or legal contracts. It was about the true cost of dignity. For years, I confused enabling with loving, believing that if I just gave enough, my family would eventually respect me. But I realized that respect is not bought. It is commanded. Family is a title earned through loyalty, not a free pass for abuse. By walking away, I didn't just save my fortune. I saved my soul. To anyone feeling used by those they love, remember that your dignity is non-negotiable. Sometimes you have to burn the bridge to stop the enemy from crossing. If you believe that respect must be earned and justice should always be served, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of truth and redemption.